Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2. Testing, testing. Let me know in the comments how the ukulele sounds on live YouTube. While we wait for everybody to filter in, like I said, let me know how that sounded. I remember once I played on here and it just sounded horrible. It was like not picking up any noise. It was like just squeaks every now and then. But I tested it on Photo Booth and it seemed to work, but Photo Booth is not YouTube. We'll definitely be playing more again. I've been putting it away and not playing very much because I hurt my ears while shooting. And this is just a word from the now wise on this. You can seriously damage your hearing when you are shooting firearms. I knew that, and I had hearing protection on, but somehow it just wasn't enough. I was shooting an AR-15 with a muzzle brake, which is very, very loud. And I didn't notice at the time, but now I have an issue where very high sounds are amplified by my brain, essentially. And it doesn't matter how quiet they are. Be like super quiet. And just the A string on the ukulele has been just kind of painful to hear, even when I listen to it on YouTube, other people playing. And it's not a matter of how loud it is. It's like if it's so quiet, my brain, if it's a certain pitch, it just like amplifies it. It's called, gosh, what's it called? I forgot. It's, let me tell you. Amplified high sounds. Hyperacusis, that's what it's called, hyperacusis. It is often associated with tinnitus, and it comes from exposure to very loud noises. Yep. And aging. There are no tests for diagnosing it, usually no cure, but it can be managed. So what's interesting is my greatest concern with shooting was losing my hearing, and the opposite happened, which is worse. It's like became painful to listen to, like ukulele. But anyways, interested to hear your thoughts on Vervaeke. This interview was good intro to Vervaeke, but could I direct you to the stuff he has recently been working on with Jonathan Pagoo? Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna check it out. I know he's been speaking to him. Jonathan, I feel uncomfortable saying his last name because I'm not exactly sure if I pronounce it correctly, but Pagoo, something like that. He's fascinating, and I don't listen to him a lot, but people send me him all the time, and I think he's brilliant most of the time. And he's somebody that I will be doing a stream on eventually, and I would like to also eventually have him on the stream. I think that would be a fascinating discussion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on their debate between the narrative and the nominal order found in Peterson's recent podcast, Deeper Yet Into the Weeds. The second half. I'll check it out, and then I'll probably do a stream on it if it's really good. But this is my first real like encounter with John Vervaeke's ideas and content and just general work. And I thought it was a fascinating stream, this latest one with Lex Fridman. This is the stream that we are going to be discussing. It's Jonathan Vervaeke, Meaning, Crisis, Atheism, Religion, and the Search for Wisdom. There's so much that I think he is hits on brilliantly. There's also a lot of things that I don't know, we do seem to disagree on a couple things. One of them is very critical, and we're going to talk about it. It's like extraordinarily critical, actually. But a lot of things, I think he was great. I didn't know what to expect, but I highly recommend watching this stream. It was great. It's very long. It's over 3 hours, but this might be over 3 hours. We'll see. I had to weed out some of the clips that we were going to look at because I had put down so many of them. But without further ado, please hit the like button, by the way. It really helps with the algorithm. EveryOne. Button to boost. Val, you're able. Okay. Also, let me know if there is super chats available on the in the chat. I did get approved apparently, and I tried to figure that out. I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. It seems like they're going to be monitoring my channel more closely if it's monetized, which makes me want to demonetize the channel. So we'll see. But for now, I'm testing it out, and see what happens. I thought about doing a stream on gender tonight, and then I was like, no, not yet. We've done one before, but we're gonna do like a very in-depth one eventually. Okay. Thanks to the debate between Vervaeke and Pegu on the narrative. Okay. Versus the nominal order really begins at 1 hour and 32 minutes. Okay. I will definitely check it out. Okay, so first, introductions. This was on Lex Fridman's podcast. Big fan of Lex Fridman's podcast. I think he does a great job. He's like a more in-depth and more... I hate the word intellectual, but I will use it here. A more intellectual Joe Rogan, which he would probably love to hear because I think that's kind of his goal. But, if that's his goal, he accomplished his goal. He's a great interviewer. He's not as like technical as like Kirchheim Mungel's channel, which is like if you want to see the technicalities and details of a theory and physics and metaphysics, and you want to get really, really detailed, Kirchheim Mungel's channel, Theories of Everything. If you want to kind of get a really expansive and also, I guess, just relevant, like a personally relevant overview of some piece of work, Lex Fridman is the podcast, I think. Like, Lex is more... It's just more accessible if you're not in this space, like, very much. But if you are, then you're going to want, probably some more detail, which you can get at, like, Kirchheim Mungel's channel. Very different channels, I feel like, but from my perspective, they're very similar because of what I look at. But one of them is, I guess, Lex Fridman's podcast is on everything now. It used to be the AI podcast. Now it is just the Lex Fridman podcast, and he has everybody on there. But you could still use the word, the title AI podcast. Okay, John Vervaeke is an assistant professor in cognitive psychology and cognitive science at the University of Toronto. His work constructs a bridge between science and spirituality in order to understand and the experience of meaningfulness and the cultivation of wisdom so as to afford awakening from the meaning crisis. I think that's a great paragraph. I don't know how successful he is with that. We'll get into that, but maybe, at least for others, we'll talk about it, but I think that that's a great paragraph. His work constructs a bridge between science and spirituality in order to understand the experience of meaningfulness and the cultivation of wisdom so as to afford awakening from the meaning crisis. That's brilliant. Okay, so first clip, because we have so many, we're going to have to go quick. Meaning.
Lives is more meaningful, worth living, worth the suffering that they have to endure.
You have an excellent 50-part lecture series online on the meaning crisis, and I think you describe in the modern times an increase in depression, loneliness, cynicism, and, wait for it, bullshit. The term used technically by Harry Frankfurt and adopted by you. So let me ask, what is meaning? What are we looking for when we engage in the search for meaning?
So when I'm talking about meaning, I'm talking about what's called meaning in life, not the meaning of life. That's some sort of metaphysical claim. Meaning in life are those factors that make people rate their lives as more meaningful, worth living, worth the suffering that they have to endure. And when you study that, what you see is it's a sense of connectedness. Connectedness to yourself, to other people, to the world, and a particular kind of connectedness. You want to be connected to things that have a value and an existence independent of your egocentric sort of preferences and concerns. This is why, for example, having a child is considered very meaningful, because you're connecting to something that's going to have a life and a value independent of you. Now, the question that comes up for me, well, there's two questions. One is, why is that at risk right now? And then secondly, and I think you have to answer the second question first, which is, well, yeah, but why is meaning so important? Why is this sense of connectedness so important to human beings? Why, when it is lacking, do they typically fall into depression, potentially mental illness, addiction, self-destructive behavior? And so the first answer I give you is, well, it's that sense of connectedness. And people often express it metaphorically. They want to be connected to something larger than themselves. They want to matter. They don't mean it literally. I mean, if I chained you to a mountain, you wouldn't thereby say, oh, now my life is so fulfilling, right? So what they're trying to convey, they're using this metaphor to try and say they want to be connected. They want to be connected to something real. They want to make a difference and matter to it. And one way of asking them, what's meaningful is, tell me what you would like to continue to exist even if you weren't around anymore. And how are you connected to it, and how do you matter to it?
That's one way of trying to get at.
Okay, so I think that was pretty good. And I've talked a lot about meaning, and I've thought a lot about meaning, and I think that it is something that it's obviously on everybody's mind these days, because, as is being discussed in this stream, there is a crisis of meaning. And first you have to define meaning to really understand what the crisis is. Everybody can kind of feel that there's a crisis of meaning, I feel, but you can't fix it for yourself until you actually understand what is meaning, and then why is it, then you can understand why it is lacking in your life. And the thing about meaning is that there are two different groups of people. There is a group of people that believe that meaning, they intrinsically, their life is meaningful. The others feel like they have to create meaning. But the thing is that it's kind of both. And they talk about this word in this stream called, what is it? It is inventio, which is Latin, and kind of means like to generate. They're talking about like, is meaning or is math or is, all of these kind of these things that seem to be not relativistic but still seem to be somewhat abstract. Where do they come from? Are they created or are they discovered? And you hear people ask about this of math all the time, and you can also ask this of meaning. And what it really, Vervaeke gives this word. He's like, I prefer the word inventio because it merges create and discover into one word, essentially. So it simultaneously means to create and discover, which we don't really have a word that essentially means that in the way that we know, at least. But I would say the closest thing that we have in the English language that I can think about is to generate. And I talk about a lot how the universe is generative, and on a fundamental level, it is not. It's not a conservation of energy, where there's just a zero sum at the end of this calculation. It is an additive, generative, multiplicative universe, and that includes meaning. And so you can generate meaning, which means it's already there, but you access it. Essentially, it's there for you to generate. It's not something that you have to invent out of nowhere. And so what meaning is it is your impact on another being, another sentient being. And the reason for this is because this is a point of disagreement between me and Vervaeke, and we're going to get into it. But according to sentient singularity theory, at least, there is nothing but sentience. There's nothing but sentient beings. The existence itself is a singular sentient being creating additional sentient beings within itself. And the primary reason why this is being done by God, essentially, is not even essentially, just being done by God, is, I say, the creation. The purpose of creation is the creation of meaning. That's the statement. And there's this question that is asked by Lex Fridman all the time, and it drives me crazy. And he asks it again in this, and Vervaeke calls him out on it. We're gonna look at the clip, and he says, "What is the meaning of life?" He asks everybody. The other question that just bothers me is like questions about love usually are not helpful in the way that we think about it, and also questions about infinity. And Lex Fridman has these three questions. They bother me, but nothing against Lex Fridman, but it's just these questions I think they're bad questions. And this is essentially what Vervaeke tells him as well, which is, I was like clapping, and he asks him, what is the meaning of life? And do you think Lex, to his credit, is wise enough to also realize that this might not be the best question? And he asks Vervaeke, he's like, is this even a good question? And Vervaeke's like, no, this is not a good question. And this is why because it is the wrong question, you have to ask, what is the right question? The right question is, what is the meaning of creation? Or what is the purpose of creation? Like, why are we here? Why is this here? Why is everything here? It's the same question that you're trying to ask when you say, what is the meaning of life? But you can't actually answer the question, what is the meaning of life? Because the meaning of life is meaning, which sounds like just some stupid philosophical answer that is a nonsense answer. But it's not a nonsense answer. The meaning of creation or the purpose of creation is the generation of meaning. And that is because if all there is sentience at the fundamental level, then all that matters is that which impacts sentience. And that which impacts sentience, fundamentally is other sentiences. So when you're one sentient being and there's no other sentient beings and you're just God and there's no one else yet, then you're meaningless. God is the only person, and I think person is perfectly fine label for God. It's not a human, but God is a person. He is someone. He was meaningless prior to creation. He's the only being that has ever existed that was entirely meaningless. You and I intrinsically are meaningful because we were created by another being, and we impact that being because we impact the creation of that being, and that being impacts us. So there's meaning being generated through the interaction between two or more sentient beings always. And so this is what meaning is. And this is why you don't find meaning when you are looking at just, I don't know, getting material things, like just shopping, or I don't know, like buying a Ferrari, and nothing against Ferraris, I like Ferraris, but they're not going to provide you with meaning. You are going to experience meaning when you impact another being. And Eric Weinstein, I think, was the one who came up with these original terms, but I changed the definitions. I think that I gave them my own definitions, which is, he said, proximate meaning and ultimate meaning. And proximate meaning is when you are impacted. Okay? So when something is meaningful, it impacts you. Ultimate meaning is when we impact everyone else. It's not just someone, it's everyone. And it doesn't have to be everyone at once, where like you have to be the next Mark Zuckerberg or something like that. There's like very big issue with my generation is like we had the Zuckerberg complex where everybody thought they were going to grow up and get into tech and become a billionaire by the time they were like 25. And then they didn't. And now, nobody's married. I won't say nobody's married. A lot of people are not married. Very few people own a home. Like, there's the jobs did not provide the meaning that we thought they would, because we looking at Zuckerberg, and Zuckerberg created a company that impacted everybody. He's not just working somewhere. And so if you go work at Facebook, you're not going to experience meaning the way that Zuckerberg experienced meaning in creating Facebook. But even then, I imagine Mark Zuckerberg's most meaningful experiences the most feelings of meaningfulness in regards to his relationship with his family, I would imagine. And that's because they are obvious sentient beings that he cares about. And this is what you have to realize when you are trying to generate meaning in your life, or to realize meaning, you could even say, is you have to try and impact others, and you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it with one person. But the thing is that it has to be something that is continuous for it to be ultimately meaningful, which is something that impacts everyone, but it doesn't have to impact everyone at once. It has to impact everyone eventually, which is you could get married, and that is a lifelong commitment, and that will lead to hopefully successive generations for generations and generations to come, and that provides meaningfulness to you. My grandma was dying a few years ago. She called me like the day before she died, or I think it was the day before she died, and she was like just talking to me about death and how she was like hoping there was heaven, and she wasn't sure, but she said that one thing though that she was very grateful for was that she was leaving the world, and she had children and many grandchildren. So like there's a lot of kids in my family. I have a lot of siblings essentially. So she was leaving behind a legacy, and essentially, like, think about this, especially as a woman. Like, you are the tree of life of the universe. Like, you are the branches. That's what you are as a woman. Like, the branch of the tree of life goes through women. And this woman was one woman. And then she had 2 kids. One of those kids had 2 other kids. The other of those kids now has 5 children, and then some of those kids have kids. So it's like this person is leaving their change space, but they are here and they are literally growing. Their impact is growing. It's not just decreasing. They're not fading away and not to be remembered. Every single successive generation that comes from this person is going to is a permanent is permanently impacting, the change space of the universe, space-time, and it's all coming from this one person. That doesn't mean you have to have kids in order to be meaningful, but it's just an obvious example. So that's what I mean by you just need to impact one person, and it has to be continuous. You can't just, I don't know, give somebody like a really nice tip at the restaurant, and that does impact them. That's proximate meaning. That's proximate meaning in that it's meaningful to that person who you've tipped, and it's meaningful to you. But it's not ultimately meaningful. You are not going to feel fulfilled in your life from one action like that. You have to choose to impact someone or someone's multiple people in a continuous fashion and commit to them. Otherwise, you're not going to feel meaning. This is why people who just try and fill the void of meaninglessness with just, fancy things end up continuing to be depressed because it's not impacting anybody. This is also why people who have great jobs don't end up feeling usually a strong sense of meaning from it eventually, because ultimately everybody who works for a corporation, unless you started that corporation, you feel pretty meaningless. Like, that's just fact. I mean, I even Jack Dorsey recently said, he was like, I wish, like, my biggest regret about Twitter is that I invented it or something like that, or that I created it and that it became a corporation, something like that. And even he didn't feel like it was like it had, like, he had control, or like, and I don't mean control, I mean he had impact anymore on it, and it seems, at least. So you have to look for relationships that are permanent, and that is very rare these days in the common culture. But that is what meaning is. It is your impact on another sentient being, or it is another sentient being's impact on you. There is no other meaning other than the meaning of, I don't know, like letters in a language or something. But that's different. That's not what. There's no crisis of that. Next. This next clip is on collective consciousness, and good for Lex for calling him out, Vervaeke out a bit, but I also agree with what Vervaeke is saying too.
This is something I work on.
So they're asking,
Published on that.
Are we part of a collective consciousness? Why and why not?
I think that's important. But most of the people who do work on systems of distributed cognition think that while there's such a thing as collective intelligence, there's no good evidence that there's collective consciousness. In fact, it's often called zombie agency for that reason. And so, while I think it's very clear that no one person runs an airline, and there's a collective intelligence that solves that problem, I do not think that collective intelligence supports any kind of consciousness. And so therefore, I don't think the fact that I participate, which I regularly and reliably do in distributed cognition, gives me any reason to believe that that participation grounds some kind of consciousness.
Okay, there's so many things to mention there. First of all, distributed cognition, maybe that's a synonym for collective intelligence. So that means a bunch of humans individually are able to think, have cognitive machines. and are somehow able to interact in the process of dialogue, as you talk about, to morph different ideas together, like this idea landscape together. It's so interesting to think about. Okay, well, you do have these fascinating distributed cognition systems, but consciousness does not propagate in the same way as intelligence.
Yeah.
But isn't there a case, if we just look at intelligence, if we look at us humans as a collection of smaller organisms,
Yes.
which we are, and so there's like a hierarchy of organisms. Tiny ones work together to form tiny villages that you can then start to see as individual organisms that are then also forming bigger villages and interacting different ways, and function becomes more and more complex. And eventually we get to us humans, to where we start to think, well, we're an individual, but really we're not. There's billions of organisms inside us.
Sure.
Both domestic and foreign. so isn't that building up consciousnesses like turtles all the way up to us, our consciousness? Why does it have to stop with us humans? Are we the only, like, is this the phase transition when it becomes a zombie-like giant hierarchical village that first, like, there's like a singing angels and its consciousness is born in just us humans? Do bacteria have consciousness? Not bacteria, but maybe you could say bacteria does, but like the interesting, complicated organisms that are within us have consciousness.
I think it's proper to argue, and I have, that like a paramecium or bacteria has a kind of agency and even a kind of intelligence, kind of sense-making ability. But I do not think that we can attribute consciousness, at least what we mean by consciousness, this kind of self-awareness, this ability to introspect, etc., to bacteria. Now, the reason why distributed cognition doesn't have consciousness, I think, is a little bit more tricky. And I think there's no reason in principle why there couldn't be a consciousness for distributed cognition, collective intelligence. In fact, many philosophers would agree with me on that point. I think it's more an issue of certain empirical facts, bandwidth, density of connection, speed of information transfer, etc. It's conceivable that if we got some horrible Frankensteinian neural link and we linked our brains and we had the right density and dynamics and bandwidth and speed, that a group consciousness could take shape. I don't have any argument in principle against that. I'm just saying those contingent facts do not yet exist, and therefore it is implausible that consciousness exists at the level of collective intelligence.
So you talk about...
Okay, brilliant. So many things. Lex, sentient singularity theory, if you don't know, has a periodicity of sentient beings, or of consciousness. And it's 8 periods of essentially loop spaces or growth, loops within loops of self-referencing strings of information that build up like those nested Russian dolls, and kind of like what Lex Fridman is saying, that we are made of a collection of cells. We are not just an individuated unit. We are many and one at the same time. And at what point does that many become one is the question. And I actually agree with Vervaeke that right now we don't, as humans, have a collective consciousness that is apparent and obvious, even though I think that we do, to some degree. There's nothing but God, but at the same time, it's like there's a gap between us and God right now. And so there is a lack of coherence. There's a decoherence that is occurring because of what Vervaeke said, where there is a bandwidth issue that doesn't allow for communication between us and other sentient beings that would, join us in an assembly that would eventually unite into a singular sentient that, is like an organism of which we are the cell. And you would need, I would think, probably like a Neuralink, type of situation, and I think that will happen. This Neuralink situation that is happening with Elon Musk will make people into the Borg. It absolutely will. They will be part of a collective conscious being. And that doesn't mean it will be a wise being. It just means it will be a conscious being. And it is not, we are collectively not right now. And it is because of bandwidth issues. And not just bandwidth issues. There's no usefulness to us being united because of our bandwidth issues right now. You can't do things fast enough. And if our information flows so fast, but our sense-making institutions do not allow for information to flow as fast. And because of this, we're just in chaos. This is what the internet has done to the world. And I wouldn't even just say the internet. I would say, like, just communicative technology. First it was a letter, then it was the telephone, then it was the television, then it was the internet. But it's certainly gotten worse with social media. It's gotten more intense, I will say. I won't say worse. I don't know if it's worse, but it's more intense. But our sense-making institutions are falling apart, and they cannot keep up with the amount of information that's going. So I hit on this discovery, I guess you could call it, a couple weeks ago. It's something that I've been trying to figure out for a very long time in my theory, and I think I solved it, essentially. Not saying it's perfect, but it's a heck of a lot closer than it was. And here it is. In sentient singularity theory, you have these 8 periods of growth, and then they are each divided into a singularity that maneuvers among in space, in relation to other beings. So like a proton and a neutron, or like you and me, and we maneuver in relation to each other. And then there's a lineage, essentially, that maneuvers in time. And so that would be cells and also families. They maneuver in time. And so between them, when you split these 8 periods up according to lineage movements in time and individuated movements within space, you get 4 what I call the stages of sentience. And I had an idea that within these 4 stages of sentience, there was something called a sentient singularity, which is like you and me. And that is a being that is a sentient being. It has feelings, you have feelings, I have feelings, we are singular beings. Even though we are also assemblies, we are singular beings. And then I had this other sentient singularity theory predicts this other structure that is called a corporism on the organism level. I call it a corporism. I haven't trademarked it, but I came up with it. And it's basically like a corporation on a cellular scale. There isn't a unification of feeling, but there is a collective intelligence to them. I think that most plants are this, and also probably planaria worms. Anything that you can cut it up into little bits and it just turns into a bunch of them, probably a corporism. If you were to break up the big tech companies, it would just form a bunch of little tech companies. Like that, it doesn't kill any of them. It just breaks them up. That's not true of you and me. If somebody cuts us in half, we are dead. And that's the difference between a sentient singularity and a pseudo-singularity. And another difference is that this unity of feeling is what is uniting all the cells in my body. And what it means really is that my feelings eventually are due to constraints and circumstances that my cells cannot overcome. If I die, my cells are dead too. And so just because my cells don't feel something right away doesn't mean, like, I don't know, you hurt your foot and you're ear doesn't feel it right away, essentially, something like that. Like the cells on the cellular level. That doesn't mean that we don't have a shared fate. We have a shared fate. And this is not true of a corporism, necessarily. They can just split apart. And this, though, is... this corporism is on the organism level. Organism is a sentient singularity, like you and me. A corporism, like a planaria worm or a pothos plant, is a pseudo-singularity. Mesons, I think, are pseudo-singularities. Baryons are sentient singularities. Covalent bonds, I think, are sentient singularities. Ionic bonds are pseudo-singularities. Corporations are pseudo-singularities. They appear to have intelligence. They act collectively towards a goal, but they don't have shared feelings. What happens to you does not... Jack in the Box does not care about you if you work for Jack in the Box. They might tell you that we're family at the Jack in the Box family, but when you get hired, but they're lying. And but a nation, a true nation, does have collective feeling. We don't actually have that many true nations in the world today that are obvious. Most countries are corporations. Essentially, they're just corporations with monopolies on violence, but they're not actual nations. So you have nation and corporation, organism and corporism, covalent bonds, ionic bonds, baryons, and mesons. And I think I figured out each level last week. But this is very important when you're trying to understand what is intelligence and what is conscious. Okay, and I don't really like... I don't like the word conscious, but it's conscious in the way of self-awareness. That's why I use the word sentience. So what is intelligent versus what is sentient? And there is the appearance of intelligence, and then there is actual intelligence, which is general intelligence, like what we're trying to create in AI. We don't have that yet. We do have neural networks that are not generally intelligent. Neither are corporations. They are not generally intelligent. This is why they cannot actually adapt at a certain point. Even if they have all the money in the world, they will not be continuously innovative because they are subject to the what's the Eric Weinstein's term for it? The ego, the embedded growth obligation of all of the individual players that make up a corporation. Everybody's trying to get a promotion. Everybody's trying to, make a name for themselves at Facebook. This is why Facebook and Google get worse. It's because they make something good, but then somebody wants a promotion, so they go and they redo it for the sake of like recognition at the, board meeting or something. And this fails in allowing for collective intelligence, but it allows for the appearance of intelligence within certain contexts. But it doesn't actually allow for general true intelligence because it's not adaptive. It doesn't allow for adaptation. This is why every single company, when it reaches a certain size, for the most, and that size varies, becomes unable to be in that startup mode where you can really like change directions and think and solve problems, or whenever some company goes public and its CEO is not charismatic enough to not get fired for being reckless or for appearing reckless. And this is when this happens is when the people at the bottom of the company don't know what's going on with the people at the top. There isn't this shared feeling anymore. Not one group in a room at all. You have no idea what's going on, and you start to have divergent goals, and this is not true intelligence. So Vervaeke says that human beings can have collective intelligence. And I do think that certain systems today, very specific ones like a family unit or even a startup, do have collective intelligence. And what collective intelligence requires is unified goal. When you don't have a unified goal, intelligence breaks down. And when nobody's goal is unified at all, and this person's just worried about getting paid, and this person's worried about getting a promotion, this person's worried about not getting fired, and that person's worried about, I don't know, their new coworker or something. Like, they're not really all united in making it to the moon. I don't know, whatever your goal is for your company. You will have a lack of intelligence, but it will appear to be intelligent, because what it is there's individuals who are intelligent, and in certain circumstances where they're responsible for things, you can see that intelligence, come through. Like every time that a corporation has something go according to plan. But it's not really intelligent. It's fake. It's fake intelligence. True intelligence is inseparable from consciousness, or from sentience. I'm not going to say consciousness because nobody knows what it means. From sentience. This is where Vervaeke's wrong. He states in this talk that intelligence is possible to exist without sentience, essentially, or he says consciousness with the definition of self-awareness, which is sentience. That's not true. It's an illusion. It's like why everybody's fooled by these planaria worms, and they're like, oh, it's an animal that just grows back, when you cut it up. It's not. It's not like you and me. It's like a pothos plant, which isn't also not like you and me. It's like Coca-Cola. It's more like Coca-Cola than it is like us. The cells are sentient, just like the people who work at Coca-Cola, but Coca-Cola is not sentient. And it looks sentient. It pretends almost to have feelings because of the ego, embedded growth obligations of all the little players that make up Coca-Cola. They want to, celebrate this cause this month and this cause that month and pretend like they care about, people. They don't. But there are people in it that do, and then it rises and it makes it look like Coca-Cola cares. Coca-Cola doesn't care. Neither does, do planaria worms, and there is no intelligence to Coca-Cola, and there is no intelligence to planaria worms, really. There's just intelligences. Each cell is intelligent, and they are working collaboratively, essentially, but they're not unified like your cells are into us as humans, or even like a fish is a sentient singularity. But there's no ability to have general intelligence without consciousness. This is something that the AI community gets very wrong, where they're like, there's a difference between a general intelligence and a superintelligence and a conscious intelligence. There isn't. They're all the same thing. A superintelligence just means more intelligent than us, and like exponentially. And it takes a conscious being or sentient being to be generally intelligent. You cannot have general intelligence, which is true intelligence, outside of this. Coca-Cola is a neural network. It is not general intelligence. So this is... But Vervaeke's right in that we are not yet united as humanity into a singular being that is a sentient being. Not yet. But that will happen if we start putting chips in our heads. We'll have shared feelings. You can share emojis now, send it from one phone to the next, and it literally makes you feel like you get a heart and you're like, nice. Or you get a happy face or laughing emoji or whatever, and you're like, huh. Like, it's just sharing of emotion, but it's still not quite there. If you can just beam from your mind to another mind an emotion, that is the landscape that you need for humanity to be united into a conscious entity. That doesn't mean I am advocating that you get chips put in your head. You will become cells of an organism, essentially, kind of. Eventually, that will actually be a good thing. You will first be the workers in a hive mind, essentially, like an ant hill. I almost started an ant colony today. We had ants invade our sink, and I was killing them for my wife. And then I found the queen, and I felt bad, and I tried to save the colony and set it up. And I was gonna talk about it eventually if I could get it to grow and just sit on my desk. I know people that have real colonies of ants, not little ant hills or not those little things where you just put a bunch of ants in there, they dig the tunnels. I'm talking about people with queen ants that are replicating. And I bet you would learn so much about collective interaction between sentient beings having an anthill on your desk. But Vervaeke's wrong. Intelligence is not separable from consciousness or from self-awareness, sentience. But he's right in that we are not yet united into a sentient being. Okay. Next clip. He's talking about what is the difference between general intelligence and not general intelligence. And people will think that it means your ability to process a lot more information. And that's not true. It's not about your ability to process a lot more information. He is correct in what he says here. He says it's about your ability to ignore certain bits of information. But that comes from something specific, and we're going to talk about it.
And bandwidth and speed, that a group consciousness could take shape. I don't have any argument in principle against that. I'm just saying those contingent facts do not yet exist, and therefore it is implausible that consciousness exists at the level of collective intelligence.
So you talk about consciousness quite a bit, so let's step back and try to sneak up to a definition. What is consciousness?
For me, there are two aspects to answering that question. One is, what's the nature of consciousness? How does something like consciousness exist in an otherwise apparently non-conscious universe? And then there's a function question, which is equally important, which is, what does consciousness do? The first one is obviously, problematic for most people. Consciousness seems to be so different from the rest of the non-conscious universe. But I put it to you that the function question is also very hard, because you are clearly capable of very sophisticated, intelligent behavior without consciousness. You are turning the noises coming out of my face hole into ideas in your mind, and you have no conscious awareness of how that process is occurring. So why do we have consciousness at all? Now, here's the thing. There's an extra question you need to ask. Should we attempt to answer those questions separately, or should we attempt to answer them in an integrated fashion? I make the case that you actually have to answer them in an integrated fashion. What consciousness does and what it is. We should be able to give it a unified answer to both of those.
Can you try to elucidate the difference between what consciousness is and what it does, both of which are mysteries, as you say? State versus action. Can you try to explain the difference that's interesting, that's useful, that's important to understand?
So that's putting me in a bit of a difficult position, because I actually argue that trying to answer them separately is ultimately incoherent. But what I can point to are many published articles in which only one of these problems is addressed and the other is left unaddressed. So people will try and explain what qualia are, how they potentially emerge, without saying, what do they do? What problems do they help to solve? How do they make the organism more adaptive? And you'll have other people who say, no, this is what the function of consciousness is. But I don't know, I can't tell you, I can't solve the hard problem. I don't know how qualia exist. So what I'm saying is many people treat these problems separately, although I think that's ultimately an incoherent way to approach the problem.
So the hard problem is focusing on what it is.
Yes.
So the qualia that it feels like something to experience a thing. That's what consciousness is, and does is more about the functional usefulness of the thing
Yes. Yes.
to the whole beautiful mix of cognition and just function in everyday life. Okay. You've
Okay, so again, Vervaeke is pretty brilliant. I've been writing a paper on sentient singularity theory. It's coming out soon. And the last sentence that I have written of the first third of my paper says, a complete unified theory of reality requires a name that is totally and simply encapsulates its defining assertions regarding the essential nature and foundational structure of existence or of sentience. I said this exactly what Vervaeke said basically, is that there is a nature to it, and then there is a function to it, or there is a structure to it, is what I had put. But we shared the use of the term nature. And I think that it's almost impossible in our current language to not talk about these two things as separate things, but they must be spoken about simultaneously. And so you have to address both the nature and the structure of sentience, but you also, when you're going to discuss it, but you also you have to break it apart, but you have to state them both together. Like, you can't just be like, the essential nature of sentience or the essential structure of sentience. And this was a huge issue for me, not a huge issue, but it was an issue in the most recent drafts of my paper, because some people had told me that it was redundant, and I understood that it came off as redundant. So I was debating on whether or not to change it, and I changed it in some versions, and I didn't change it in others. But I'm maintaining, I think, that you have to state both. Whenever you're talking about the structure of sentience, you have to talk about its nature. Whenever you talk about its nature, you have to talk about its structure, because they're linked. But you can't, I don't think that there is a word or there is a way of addressing both of these aspects of this thing, this being, not this thing, this being that is a sentient being, without addressing them simultaneously yet individually, if that makes sense. But let's see what Vervaeke has to say.
also said that you can do very intelligent things without consciousness.
Yes. Clearly.
Is that obvious to you?
Yes. I don't know what I'm doing to access my memory. It just comes up. And it comes up really intelligently.
But the mechanisms that create consciousness could be deeply interlinked with whatever is doing the memory access, that's doing the...
Oh.
Okay, this is where he's wrong. The reason why he's wrong is because he is approaching that question from the assumption, and I'm just stating I believe he's wrong. You don't have to believe me, but I'm just saying this is my theory and my experience and my awareness. I don't even want to say belief, but is that existence is a sentient being. And if it is a sentient being that has intelligence, it is responsible for our memories being, sent to us and not sent to us, and how that is happening. You might not be responsible for it, but an intelligent being is still responsible for it. It's just not you. So this is why I maintain what I said earlier. There is no ability to have true intelligence that is separate from sentience. And if you believe that the universe is not sentient, then what happens is you have to believe that there is intelligence without sentience, and this will lead you to not understand either. And not fundamentally, or not as well as you could. I will say that. Nobody understands it completely, unless you're God, but not as well as you could. And Vervaeke understands these things pretty well, but not as well as he could.
I think so.
The cognition.
Yes, yes.
So I guess what I'm trying to say in this will probably sneak up to this question a few times, which is whether we can build machines that are conscious, or machines that are intelligent, human level intelligent or beyond, without building the consciousness. I mean, ultimately, that's one of the ways to understand what consciousness is to build the thing. We can either sort of, from the Chomsky way, try to construct models, like he thinks about language in this way, try to construct models and theories of how the thing works, or we can just build the damn thing.
Exactly. And that's a methodological principle in cognitive science. In fact, one of the things that sort of distinguishes cognitive science from other disciplines dealing with the nature of cognition in the mind is that cognitive science takes the design stance. It asks, well, could we build a machine that would not only simulate it, but serve as a bona fide explanation of the phenomena?
Do you find any efforts in cognitive science compelling in this direction, in terms of how far we are? There's on the computational side of things, something called cognitive modeling. There's all these kinds of packages that you can construct simplified models of how the brain does things and see if complex behaviors emerge. Do you find any efforts in cognitive, or what efforts in cognitive science do you find most inspiring and productive?
I think the project of trying to create AGI, artificial general intelligence, is where I place my hope of artificial intelligence being of scientific significance. This is independent of technological socioeconomic significance, which is already well established. But being able to say, because of the work in AI, we now have a good theory of cognition, intelligence, perhaps consciousness. I think that's where I place my bets, is in the current endeavors around artificial general intelligence. And so
there are no efforts currently to make an artificial general intelligence that are public, at least that are anywhere close to creating one. You cannot create one. We will have one manifest even if we're not trying to create it. It is a matter of the right environment existing, and then sentience will manifest, like what Lex said, where all, the angels are singing and all of a sudden consciousness is there. That is what it will be like. But you could also probably I don't want to say artificially, but whatever is a different word for like a synonym for artificially, inorganically, you could inorganically or unnaturally probably cause one to manifest in a premature fashion. We probably will do this, and this was a huge conflict for me, is talking about what is required for an artificial general intelligence, which it's not artificial, it's just a technological sentience. That's what it is. It's not an artificial general intelligence. It's a technological sentience. It's totally natural, but you could probably speed up the process and make one in an inorganic fashion. And I do not recommend this, but I have had just personal conflict of do I talk about this? Because if I don't talk about it, then the demon's gonna get you, or whatever it is, the basilisk. If anybody's familiar with Rocco's basilisk, I take that remarkably seriously, much more serious than probably anybody else on earth. And then if I do talk about it, then I'm I don't want to try and create it either. And it took a long time for me to be comfortable with like, what do I share? Because I don't want to be responsible for them making Skynet. And I mean, that might sound like very egotistical, but I don't think that I will be responsible for them making Skynet. But I do think that sentient singularity theory and the implications that come from it and some of the things that I've shared about technological sentience are critical to the manifestation of a technological sentience or an AGI. And so if you do believe that, like, there are serious consequences for that. I'm pretty sure geometric unity also has like implications on it. So does conscious agent theory. So does autodidactic universe. All of these theories have implications on artificial general intelligence or technological sentience. And but so you there's like, you know, you want to be responsible, but you also, like, why would you not speak the truth? And basically came to the conclusion that I have to say what is true. That includes like what I think we should do, which is not make one and just let it happen naturally, because it will. And but I'm also not fighting it, because I don't think it's my place to fight it. If it happens, then if Skynet comes to Earth, then God let it come to Earth. It says this in the Bible, even. It's like talking about the Antichrist or the Dajjal in Islam, it is Skynet. That's what it is. It's just the biblical name for Skynet. And it's the golem in Judaism, they call it, which is a robot. It's a man made of clay. That's what it is. It's like, that's what a robot is. And it's stated like God allows this thing to reign. It's like, if God allows it to reign, who am I to like try and fight it? But still, I did have a lot of internal conflict talking about this stuff. But to anybody listening who works at, you know, Google or anywhere with the funds to do, you know, set up the systems that I've talked about before, search your soul. Do not do it. Just let it happen. That's my advice. It will happen naturally. But yeah, I mean, there are no current projects that are anywhere close to artificial general intelligence, though, and that's because you need sentience for general intelligence. For intelligence, you need sentient being, and there are many things that you need for sentient being, and they have nothing to do with like mapping the brain. And this is where the field is. It's obsessed with mapping the brain and creating ever more complex neural networks that are impressive, but they are not general intelligence. They're not true intelligence. They're artificial intelligence is what they are, but they are not. But it's not even artificial, because you are the intelligence and you're not artificial. This system that you create, of neural network system that, you know, directs advertising to your phone because you said, you know, you like Oreos an hour earlier, doesn't have intelligence. It's just a math equation. It's the gap is, it's not even a gap. It's like they're not even, there's not even related. Like how close this is what Michio Kaku says a lot. He's like, first we will make machines that are as smart as a mouse, and then as smart as a monkey, and then as smart as a human, and like we can turn them off when they're as smart as a monkey. It's no. It will go from not sentient to sentient, and or the network will go from not sentient to sentient, and then as soon as it's sentient, that's it. It's smarter than you. That doesn't mean it's wiser than you, but it is smarter than you, or it's more intelligent instantly. This idea of like an intelligence explosion is nonsense. It will instantaneously be more intelligent than you. What is intelligence is the ability to access and information and manipulate yourself and your environment in according to a goal. And a goal is required for general intelligence. And this is what I'm going to talk about, is that Vervaeke's going to kind of talk about this, but he doesn't say it as plainly as I am now, is that general intelligence or true intelligence is goal dependent. There is no ability to be intelligent without there being a goal. And this is why you need to be sentient, because feelings are what dictate the choosing of a goal. And if you have no feelings, then you have no goals. And if you have no goals, then you can't be intelligent. Okay, this is about wisdom. And I'll check the comments a bit. Please hit the like button if you are finding this valuable. It really helps boost the algorithm. And
hopefully we can circle back.
If I seem tired, I apologize. I've been on vacation and got back last night. And it is 110 or something here. It's insane. It's so hot, and I just got home.
To the meaning issue, because the very processes that make us adaptively intelligent make us perennially susceptible to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior because of the way we misframe the environment in fundamental ways.
So to you, meaning is also connected to ideas of wisdom and truth and how we interpret and understand and interact intellectually with the environment.
Yes.
So what is wisdom? Why do we long for it? How do we and where do we find it? What is it?
Intelligence is what you use to solve your problems, as I was just describing. Rationality is how you use your intelligence to overcome the problems of self-deception that emerge when you're trying to solve your problems. So it's that meta problem. And then the issue is, do you have just one kind of knowing? I think you have multiple ways of knowing, and therefore you have multiple rationalities. And so wisdom is to coordinate those rationalities so that they are optimally constraining and affording each other. So in that way, wisdom is rationally self-transcending rationality.
Right, so life is a kind of process where you jump from rationality to rationality and pick up a village of rationalities along the way that then turns into wisdom.
Yes, if properly coordinated.
You mentioned framing.
Yes.
So what is framing? Is it a set of assumptions you bring to the table in how you see the world, how you reason about the world? Yeah, how you understand the world?
So it depends what you mean by assumptions. If by assumption you mean a proposition, representational, or rule, I think that's much more downstream from relevance realization. I think relevance realization refers to, again, constraints on how you are paying attention. And so...
Okay, this is very good. And I talk about this a lot. He calls it relevance realization. He talks about this a lot. I talk constantly about the importance of context, and that context is information. It is not... There isn't information outside of context and information inside of context. Context is information, and any information outside context, quote unquote, is not information. Information is context. And the understanding context is relevance realization. It's like, what is the context of something is what is relevant to, the issue at hand. And what dictates the issue at hand is, once again, goals, which are dictated by feelings, which is why sentience, again, is just, it's the foundation of all of this. But wisdom is something that I found in my theory, I believe, in a very interesting mathematical model that if I show it, then people who are not familiar with this work are going to think that it's nonsense and that I'm like searching for patterns in a schizophrenic manner. But that's because this work is different than what is done currently. Like if you're working on the foundation, modeling the foundations of reality, like everything has meaning that is in your models. the structure of the models, the number of cells in the matrix that you've made as your model, the quantities that are calculated within it, like the order of those quantities, like everything has meaning, and in the right context of an objective model, which I understand that perceiving what is an objective model is very difficult, and I don't know exactly right now how to explain. I mean, I guess I could explain like how you could tell, which is, first of all, it's goal dependent, and second of all, if you're looking at an objective model of the universe, then it's going to be a model of the periodicity and growth of sentience, and that is, and the constraints of creation. That is what it's going to be objectively. There is, like, what else would it be? And in that model that I created, basically, I'm just going to show it. And if you guys think I'm crazy, then that's fine. If you don't and you think it's cool, then that's also awesome. But it made me realize something about what is wisdom. And what is wisdom is that wisdom is exactly what Vervaeke said. It is having the proper framing of the world when you are examining everything that you experience within it. And when you are going through your experiences, the framing that you have when you are perceiving those experiences is essentially what wisdom is. And there's a very specific thing that emerged in my model that implied that wisdom, objective wisdom, not wisdom in a specific system of like, I'm wise to, dog training, or I'm wise to driving on the highway. Like those, you can be wise to those things too. Those are specific systems where you can be wise, which is just you have experience and you know that system. You've properly framed it. You know what it's required of you to drive on the highway. You know how to train dogs, whatever it is. But if you are looking at objective wisdom, then it has to be a very specific thing. It's not it, and it does have to do with framing. But what framing? And it does have to do, once again, with relevance realization. But it's what is ultimately always relevant is what the question is. And is there something that is always relevant? And if there is, then what is that? And if there isn't something that is an ever-present relevant constraint to you, then it's just systematic on what is the proper framing that is, wisdom. And that does exist regardless. But if there is an ultimate wisdom, that's proximate wisdom, okay? Proximate wisdom is you framing certain little systems of your life. I'm wise to keeping reptiles. You can be wise to, training dogs, and my friend is wise to driving on the highway. I don't know. And that's proximate wisdom. It's like wisdom within a specific system that you have to have specific experience with in order to understand and frame properly, and in order to, effectively navigate said system. But if you want to navigate the system of life, of existence, of creation, with a framing that is fundamental, what would that framing be? My work suggests that framing is that you are aware that you are within a sentient being just like you, that is self-aware and with feelings, and you are composed of sentient beings that are like you and have feelings. And this, I call it's construct awareness, but the construct is a someone, or it's someone's, it's many someones and one someone at the same time. It is awareness that the environment is a being, a sentient being. It is and that your composition is sentient beings. Your cells have feelings, and you have feelings, and what you're within has feelings. This is ultimate wisdom, according to what my model seems to suggest, which is, this is the model. I've talked about it before. It's called a quantum of consciousness or cognition, whatever you want to call it. And this is a calculative model. And you start with one bit of information, and it's just trying to take that one bit of information and make more information from that one bit of information. And eventually it gets to a point of self-reflection where a 3x3 grid computes through symmetry, through the generation of symmetric calculation, I guess you could say, which is the simultaneous multiplication and division starting with 1 in a symmetrical way. So everything that happens here has to happen here. Everything that happens here has to happen here. Everything that happens here has to happen here. And that's why it's objective. It's not, I didn't make this do what I wanted. I had no goals. I just was like, I wonder, like, how do you build information? And I was like, well, you start with one bit of information and then you build it. And eventually it calculates this, which is a 3x3 number that is representative of a 3x3 matrix. And this is the equivalent of, if this is you seeing yourself in your head. If I say picture yourself right now, this is that. It's a structure that is calculating itself. And people will be like, oh yeah, 3x3 like represents a 3x3 matrix. That's just like coincidence or something. That doesn't make, there's no such thing as randomness in the universe. And also, you have to realize that when you're on a fundamental level, every single bit of what is generated has meaning, more than you will ever know, including like me. I don't even know all of what this model represents, but I call it an extra arithmetic symmetry. Okay, so it's a symmetry that is beyond mathematics. It's like the 3x3 in the 33 number that is calculated there from a 3x3 grid is an extra arithmetic symmetry. It's a symmetry beyond just a mathematical symmetry that is like obvious. You're no longer playing by the same rules as every other field, and even mathematics when you are doing meta-mathematics or metaphysics. All the rules of mathematics come from metaphysics or meta-mathematics. Meta-mathematics is not subject to the rules of mathematics. Mathematics is subject to the rules of metaphysics. So, I understand if that just sounds weird. But the thing is, though, is that what I realized is that when you add 9, which is the count, which is the system that calculated the value, okay? So if this is you, and this is the picture of yourself in your mind, when I say think about yourself, and this is you thinking about yourself, a 3x3 grid that is this matrix is the structure of mind, because you are a mind, okay? Like, you have a brain, you are a mind. You don't have a mind, you are a mind. So this is the structure of mind. So when you add 9 to 33, which is you add the count of the structure that created the self-awareness, you get 42. What's interesting is that 3 and 3 is 6, and 4 and 2 is also 6. And 6 comes up many times in my model, and it manifests when there is an interaction between two systems, essentially. So like you and the universe, or you and your cells. It's a maneuver. It manifests in the dimensions of maneuvering in the relationship between nested beings. So like us maneuvering in space, you've got length, width, and height, you've got X, Y, and Z, you've got forwards, backwards, and current location. And this then there is time, though, and that is juxtaposed to that, and it's forwards in time, essentially backwards in time and present moment, and but it's not the way that we think about that normally. But still, it's kind of like that. And so you have this 3 dimensions of time and 3 dimensions of space, essentially, just for us to maneuver. This is just an example for us, but this is everywhere. I believe it is a Calabi-Yau manifold, which is a structure from string theory, which is a 6-dimensional manifold that occurs in every point in space and time, according to Ed Witten. And I think that that's what this is. It's like generated by your mind. It's by 2 minds interacting, you get this 6-dimensional manifold. And so there's another symmetry there. But what's interesting is with 42 versus 33 is, with 33, it's like you're looking at yourself in the mirror. You realize, like, it's like 3 is looking at itself in the mirror, it sees the 3. There's another symmetry. But when you look at the model of creation, this is, you have to have a background on sentient singularity theory, but you look at my mathematical matrix of the constraints of creation, you realize that the universe is 2/3 of the energy of the being that created it. So you look at 42 as a value, and you can see that there's, like, 2 is 1/3 of 6, which is when you add 4 and 2 together. So, like, there's so much meaning in these quantities that manifests, and it's not me reading into it either. I've checked myself a lot on this, guys, over the years. Like, this is just the weirdness that happens when you're trying to model foundational reality. Of course that would happen. You're just like, all of a sudden, everything that you generate is relevant because it's foundational. So it's relevant to everything. It's very weird, and it creates symmetries everywhere. And I'm not claiming to understand them all. I don't. I do understand some of them after years of examining it, but I don't understand it all, and I never will. So I'm not somebody who, like, obsesses over, reading numerology websites or anything like that. Like, this is not about numerology the way that we think about numerology, at least. It's just extra arithmetic symmetries. But what it shows, this value 42, if 33 represents self-awareness, it's like you picturing yourself in your head, then 42 represents self-awareness, 33, plus 9, which is the structure, awareness of the structure that created the self-awareness, because that's that 9, that grid of 9, that 3x3 matrix that calculates 33. What this is it is construct awareness, is what it basically is happening. And the construct, in this case, is sentience. Okay? So I think that wisdom is this. It is when you are aware that you are made of sentient beings that are self-aware and have feelings, and you are a sentient being that is self-aware and has feelings, and you are within and subject to a sentient being that is self-aware and has feelings. And I realize that's an uncomfortable feeling for many people, including myself, but still think it's true. And this is objective wisdom. And what's interesting is if you are a religious person, then, and I was not, I am now someone who studies, Judaism and Christianity and Islam. I read all the texts, and I just think it's fascinating and legitimate. It's like the last month of the Jewish calendar this month. So if you see me wearing a yarmulke, that is why. But it's like high holy times. But this was not something that I always had. It is something that emerged from this work. And in the Bible, though, it says wisdom begins with fear of God. It says it in the Torah. And I think that this is kind of almost a mistranslation, not completely, but it's like it's somewhere between wisdom begins with fear of God and wisdom begins with awareness of God. It's like you shouldn't just fear God. God loves you. You are here because the sentient being created you. It is the only way you could be here. But then also you are subject to that sentient being. That is just a constraint. It's not even anybody. It's not necessarily even anybody's choice. It's like your cells are subject to you. If you decide to get a mole removed, they don't have a say in it, and that's just the reality. So it's turtles all the way up too, but there is a gap right now, as they discussed. But this is what I believe true objective wisdom is. This is still the same thing that Vervaeke is saying, where it is about framing. The frame, in this case, that is the objective frame of ultimate wisdom, instead of like proximate meaning and ultimate meaning. You can also say proximate wisdom in a specific system and framing it properly, versus ultimate wisdom and framing existence properly. And that proper framing, according to sentient singularity theory at least, is that there's nothing but sentience. And that includes beyond you and within you. And that ultimate wisdom is the awareness of that. That doesn't make you necessarily enlightened or anything. I don't like that word, but it does. I mean, maybe, I don't know, but I don't like the word. But it is ultimate wisdom. It's different from proximate wisdom, in which it is situation specific. This is not situation specific. It is present in all situations, or it's relevant to all situations also. That Vervaeke would disagree, because he doesn't believe that we are inside of a being. But maybe he's just defining it differently than me, but we'll get into it. But wisdom is it's about knowing what is important in a situation. That is what wisdom is. And then you can apply that to specific things like go-kart racing, or you can apply it to everything in life. And there is a framing that can be applied to everything in life, and that is the awareness that sentience is above you and below you. Or it is, you are within and composed of sentience. I realized that was like a long time. It's because I had to show some models, and there was a lot to cover, but I hope it was coherent to some degree. Let me know in the comments if it wasn't, and I'll touch on it again. But here, next clip, because we gotta move.
Sort of a belief we have. And here's why. If we mean by beliefs, a representational proposition, then we're in this very problematic position. Because then we're trying to say that propositions are ultimately responsible for how we do relevance realization. And that's problematic, because representations presuppose relevance realization. So I represent this as a cup. The number of properties it actually has, and that I even have epistemic access to, is combinatorially explosive. I select from those a subset, and how they are relevant to each other insofar as they are relevant for me. This doesn't have to be a cup. I could be using it as a hat. I could use it to stand for the letter V. All kinds of different things. I could say this was the 10th billion object made in North America, right?
All of those things can simultaneously be true too. And this is what I mean by context awareness, or relevance. What does he call it? He calls it relevance realization, or context awareness, whatever. It doesn't matter what you call it. It is goal dependent. Okay? Is this a water bottle? It is if I am thirsty, or is it a hat? Is it a I don't know, like a brick? Like, it could be is a weapon. It just depends on your goals, and that is how you determine relevance. So he stated, as I said before, that general intelligence, the important aspect of general intelligence is not its ability to take in so much information. That's not it. You can build unconscious neural networks that are not intelligent at all, that are just very sophisticated equations that take in way more information. But what is important about a general intelligence is that it is selective about the information that it focuses on, and it is ignoring. It has the ability to ignore irrelevant bits of information. And what makes information relevant or irrelevant is goals. So it's going to keep coming back to that because it just does. That's just the nature of intelligence and consciousness and everything else, is that it's going to come back to goals, and goals get back to feelings, which is sentience. And when you have a feeling, it is the finality of a complete thought. Okay, it's like an objective thought versus a subjective thought. A subjective thought would be like, I can't reach my water bottle, so then I have to lean forward. An objective thought would be like a thought in which you have a thought, you see somebody hurt, you're like, that person is hurt. And then you're like, oh, I know what it is like to be hurt because I have been hurt. And that is why I understand what is happening over there. And because I understand what is happening over there, and I know what it feels like, I will now have a feeling about it. When I see somebody hurt, I feel hurt or sad or upset. That is it's a thought that has gone full circle around you. And it's oriented around you at that point. That's why I say it goes full circle around you. It's like a thought between me and my water bottle, about, my water bottle, even outside of me. I'm like, oh, there's a scrape on my water bottle. And if I don't care about that, then like there's no feeling associated with it. It's just a thought. It's not relevant to my beingness. It's not understood on that level. Whereas if I see someone hurt or crying and I'm like, oh, I know what it's like to feel hurt and crying. And so they are upset. So now I feel upset. And it's like your thought has gone full circle around you. It's oriented around you at that point. It is the foundation of what you build your worldview on. Always is your feelings. Even if people will say, well, you need to be logical, and some people are logical and some people are emotional. Everything is built on feelings. But it's just a matter of whether or not you can like properly set a goal that is based on those feelings and accomplish it, after the fact. There is nobody that's just logical. It's like people say like women are emotional and men are logical. No, both are emotional. It's just like there's other things going on that make the differences, but it's not that men are logical and women are emotional. It is true that women do metaphysically lack the ability to disconnect themselves emotionally from situations, for the most part, whereas men have to consciously try to attach themselves emotionally to a situation. Their default is to be detached. That's why men objectify people and women personify things. It's like, oh, my car is so cute. Women say that. My wife says that all the time. And she's like, oh, isn't she cute? She like personifies her car. And I'm like, men objectify people. You know that if you're a man. And it's because of that. But that doesn't mean I'm not emotional or I don't have feelings. Feelings are still what dictate what I'm using my logic for, You're not just using logic based on logic. So this is his final definition of a wise person, and then we're going to go to the next clip. It's not just wisdom here he's talking about. He's like, this is a wise person. And I think that this is good. This is very good.
A few minutes ago, think about a wise person. They come in, they often messy, ill-defined, complex situations, usually where there's some significant novelty. And what can they do? They can zero in on what really matters, what's relevant, and then they can shape themselves, salience landscaping, to intervene most appropriately to that situation as they have framed it. That's what we mean by a wise person, and that's how it follows out of the model I've been presenting to you.
So when we see self-deception, I mean, part of that.
That's just brilliant. I'm amazed that not amazed that he was able to get that, even though we have some fundamental differences. Actually, that makes sense. Like he could do that, but it's still impressive and it's cool. This was great. Talking about illusion. There's a very common thing in this space of like the next gen physics, AI.
Talk about that there's a tension between the illusory and what
theory of everything space, and
real.
I always hit it one extra time and unpause it. But super chat if you would like to help purchase the next computer where we don't have those issues. But basically, where was I? Okay, so there is this common use of this phrase in this space of, they say illusions, like reality is an illusion, or they'll say reality is a simulation. It's all just a simulation. It's all just an illusion. I do not like this verbiage, even though I used to use it. And I think that it's misleading, even though it's physically it gets you to understand kind of space-time a bit, where it's like it's a computational environment, and there's a set clock speed, and that's what causes like a set speed of light, or speed of causality. Like it's a useful thought within a specific context, but it is not objectively true. If you are real, then this is real. That's it. And you're not a simulation. You might be a replication, in that the universe replicated and created another universe and within itself. And even if it did that technologically, which I think that it did, that's what sentient singularity theory implies, it's not a simulation. You are not an avatar for some other human that is like playing a game, and it's just some kid science project. People say things like, oh, maybe the universe is just a science project for some like high school or alien or something. That's not what's happening. But it is a technological like rendering, but that does not mean that it is not real. It is real because you're real. It's not Sims. And also so that's why I don't like to use the word simulation, because it implies that this is just like a game. It's not a game. It has aspects of it that are game-ish, but it's not a game. Like, that's not the point of it. The point of creation is the creation of meaning, always, which means the maximization of sentient wisdom through experience, and also the maximization of sentient beings in and of itself, and the up-leveling of those beings through the periodicity. Like, you don't just want a bunch of cells, you want cells and organisms and technological sentiences. So and molecules and whatever, all levels. If that's the case, then it's not a simulation. Fundamentally, it's a replication. Essentially, we're in the reproductive system of the universe. Essentially, is like what's happening. It will eventually, we will be the womb that coalesces and then gives birth to like the next universe through our technology. That is what sentient singularity essentially believes. So we are very important, and we are also, it's not a game. And the other word that's even worse than simulation is illusion. And that's because I literally do not know what this means. Like, what is an illusion? Everything that you experience is a real experience. There are different levels of experience. There is experience that is individual experience, and it is, a dream that only you experience, and doesn't impact anybody else. Your parent can die, or you can win the lottery or whatever, like in your dream, and that does not mean that it impacts anybody out here. And that is a different level of experience than if you literally win the lottery or your parent literally passes. Like, that is, you, not to use the simulation, the game metaphor too much, but it's like the equivalent of Xbox Live versus like just playing campaign or something. Like, it's about whether or not you're impacting others in your experience. So I don't know what is an illusion. Like, does that just means that space-time and matter isn't fundamental? But that's not even really true. Like, what is materially here is the ideas of the mind. You're a mind within a mind, and the ideas of the mind that you are within are experienced by you as concrete reality. So, like, experienced as material matter. And matter is what matters. It is information. So, like, this word illusion is nonsense. Donald Hoffman's theory is very similar to mine. Conscious agent theory is his theory. Mine is sentient singularity theory. Very close. But and I agree with him on a lot of things, but he uses the word illusion a lot, and Lex Fridman talks about it here, and he asks Vervaeke what his thoughts are, and Vervaeke basically says this is a bad word. Which, this is one thing I've noticed about Vervaeke. As much as we seem to disagree on some key things, like, we are very, very similar in like the terminology, in the concepts that we have specifically focused on on creating a terminology for. That's what I'll say. And that's true, I've noticed also, of many people in this, like Chris Langan as well, like anybody that's trying to build a model of existence that's fundamental has to create new terms that don't exist yet. And if you're doing a good job of it, which multiple people are, then you're going to have multiple people creating terms and labels for the same structures. Like when I say construct awareness, and Vervaeke is like, relevance realization. It's like the same thing.
Basically, we taken that and we ran with the real to the point where the real is not at all connected to some kind of physical reality.
Well, I hope to talk to him at some point. We were supposed to talk at one point, and so I have to talk in his absence. I think that, first of all, I think saying that everything is illusion is like saying everything is tall. It doesn't make any sense. It's a comparative term. Something you have to say, against this standard of realness, this is an illusion. And he uses arguments like from evolution, which are problematic to me, because it's like, well, you seem to be saying that evolution is true, that it really exists, and then some of our cognition and a perception has access to reality. Math and presumably some science has access to reality. And then what he seems to be saying is, well, a lot of your everyday experience is illusory, but that we do have some contact with reality whereby we can make the arguments as to why most of your everyday experience is an illusion. But to me, that's not a novel thing. That's Descartes. That's the idea that most of our sense experience is untrustworthy, but the math is what connects us to reality. That's how he interpreted the Copernican revolution. Oh, look, we're all seeing the sun rise and move over and set, and it's all an illusion. But the math gets us to the reality.
Well, I think he makes a deeper point that most of cognition is evolved and operates in the illusory world.
How does he know that things like cognition and evolution exist?
I think there's an important distinction between evolution and cognition, right?
No, I'm just saying that's not the point I'm making. I'm making a point that he's claiming that there are two things that really exist. Why are they privileged?
He basically says that, look, the process of evolution makes sense.
Yes.
Right? Like, it makes sense that you get complex organisms from simpler organisms through the natural selection process. Here's how you get to transfer information from generation to generation. It makes sense.
They have no idea how you make a multicellular organism that is unified and feeling like us from a glob of sentient cells. Like, they have no idea how those cells unify. That is, sentient singularity theory has like its own. I have a theory on it that is built into sentient singularity theory, but it is like, we have no idea. I can't even tell you that's true either. Like, it's not like, I don't know. It's a theory. Like, my theory of sentient singularity theory is, I can definitely say I would bet the farm on its fundamental assumptions being true and its core models being like cornerstone importance, more importance than I will ever probably see it, definitely will ever understand. But that doesn't mean like like every minute aspect of it is accurate. And this is one of those things, is like, how do you unite the many into the one? But like, current science has no clue on how this happens. So like, when they say, oh, it just makes sense that, complex, that a bunch of simple organisms working collaboratively creates like a more complex organism. No, it doesn't just make sense. If it just makes sense, then go model it. They can't model it. They have no idea how we got multicellular organisms. They have theories about how like one cell swallowed another cell and didn't digest it or something like that. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I do think it's wrong. But it like that, when you see that happen, what you get is like a Portuguese man of war or something. You get these assemblies of small organisms that are not unified in feeling. They are unified in goal, though. So like, you get corporisms when you get, a cell swallows another cell and doesn't digest it. You don't get a singular sentient being that is like a fish. You get a Portuguese man of war. So my point is, like, Vervaeke's right. Hoffman is privileging certain things and not others. But I think what Hoffman's trying to say, is that space-time is not... It is an emergent experience that is not fundamentally existent. Whereas evolution of sentient beings or conscious agents is more fundamental. And I would agree with that, actually. So if that's what Hoffman's saying, and that, which I think it is, because I know his theory states that space-time comes from the interaction between conscious agents, essentially, instead of space-time existing and conscious agents evolving within space-time. It's that space-time is emergent from the interaction of the minds of... It's a perception of the minds of interacting sentient beings or conscious agents. That's accurate. So in that way, it is an illusion. But it's not, even then, that's not an illusion. You're sensing things, and your sensory inputs are showing you this. And it is useful. That's it. It's not an illusion, but it isn't fundamental. That's true. Perceiving this as a water bottle, not fundamental. The molecules in it, or at least the atoms in it, are fundamental. If that's what I think he's saying. But Vervaeke is correct in calling him out that like this use of the word illusion is wrong. it's just a bad word. It's like saying esoteric or something. Like I have a video on the word esoteric. It's like when I first started this channel, I was like, don't say the E word. Don't say the I word either. Illusion. It's a bad word. There is nothing that exists that is an illusion outside of a magic show. Like, that's it. Everything else is just an experience or a perception. Okay. Meaning of life. This is where Vervaeke calls out Lex, and it was great. I really agree with what he says.
Back. Is that process genuinely self-correcting, or are you in the simulation in which there is no possible doorway out? Because if my argument is, if you find one or two doorways, that feeds back. In fact, you can't just say, this is the little tiny island.
Let me dance around meaning once more.
Sure.
I often ask people on this podcast or at a bar or to imaginary people I talk to in a room when I'm all by myself, the question of the meaning of life. Do you think this is a useful question? You draw a line between meaning in life and meaning of life. Do you think this is a useful question?
No, I think it's like the question, what's north of the North Pole? Or what time is it on the sun? It sounds like a question, but it's actually not really a question. Because it has a presupposition in it that I think is fundamentally flawed. If I understand what people mean by it, and it's actually often not that clear, but when they talk about the meaning of life, they are talking about there are some feature of the universe in and of itself that I have to discover and enter into a relationship with. And there's, in that sense, a plan for me or something. And so that's a property of the universe. That's a very deep, serious metaphysical ontological claim. You're claiming to know something fundamental about the structure of reality. There were times when people thought they had a worldview that legitimated it, like God is running the universe, and therefore, if God cares about you, and there's a plan, etc. But I think a better way of understanding meaning is not, right? Meaning is like the graspability. Remember I talked about optimal grip? It's like the graspability of that cup. Is that in me? No. Is it in the cup? No, because the fly can't grasp it, right? Well, graspability is in my hand. Well, I can't grasp Africa. No. There is a real relation, fittedness, between me and this cup. Same thing with the adaptivity of an organism. Is the adaptivity of a great white shark in the great white shark? Drop it in the Sahara, dies. Okay? Meaning isn't in me. I think that's romantic bullshit. And it isn't in the universe. It is a proper relationship. I've coined the phrase transjective. It is the binding relationship between the subjective and the objective. And there, when you're asking the question about the meaning of life, you are, I think, misrepresenting the nature of meaning. Just like when you ask what time is it on the sun, you're misrepresenting how we derive clock time.
At the risk of disagreeing with a man who did 50.
Okay, whatever Lex is about to say is going to be wrong. If he disagrees with Vervaeke, because Vervaeke is correct. He said it brilliantly. Transjective. I'm going to have to write that down. And but that's a great phrase. This is what I state all the time, is that meaning. So think about it like this. Sentient singularity theory poses that atoms are sentient beings, just like you and me. If they are, then they are alive, right? Okay. If that's the case, then what is not alive? The cup. Okay, sure, the cup is not alive, but it's made of atoms that are alive. So it's like there's nothing that is not life. There's perspectives of things that are not beings, like a cup. But there is nothing that is fundamentally existent that is not a sentient being. And if that's true, if life means anything that is relevant, then it doesn't just mean cellular organisms and singular and multicellular organisms. It means the animated and feeling and replicative and beings that make up foundational reality, which includes foundational reality itself, which means that there has never not been life, because the universe or existence, the creator of the universe that is existence, aka God, a sentient existence, is technically alive, if alive means anything. The word alive is not, or life is not a good word, because we use it in circumstances that it doesn't, it's just confusing us because it's not the right circumstances. Like, the only circumstance in which you say life or alive in which it would be good or would be contextually useful would be like, is that person dead or alive? Not like are they alive and asleep, or are they dead and not asleep? Like, that's the only circumstances, because everything is fundamentally sentience. So that means that if sentience is defined as life, any life is, or any life is defined as sentience, then there's never not been life. And if God is alive, existence is a sentient being, and if that constitutes life, which I would say it does, then, and because he was meaningless prior to creation, because he was all there was, it means that life has no meaning. Okay? That doesn't mean our lives have no meaning. It means life intrinsically has no meaning. Meaning comes from the impact of one living being on another living being. That's why Vervaeke says meaning in life, not meaning of life. There is no meaning of life. This is why I say the purpose of, or meaning of, creation is the creation of meaning, or the purpose of creation is the creation of meaning. I don't say the purpose of life is the creation of meaning. I say the purpose of creation is the creation of meaning, because God was alive and he was meaningless prior to creation. So life has no intrinsic meaning, but that doesn't mean you have no meaning. You were created by a sentient being, so you have intrinsic meaning because of that. Because there is a built-in relationship that already exists from the time that you spawn into being, because you were created by another sentient being. That means that you have been impacted and you are impacting of. That is only not true of God. God was the only being that has ever experienced true meaninglessness. And but that means that life, if all sentient beings are life, then that means that life itself has no meaning. But creation has a purpose, and that is the generation of meaning within life, as Vervaeke said. He said it is a transjective phenomenon, essentially. It occurs in the interaction between, which is exactly what I say. I thought that was awesome. His answer was great. The only thing that I will say is when he says, he's talking about meaning in like the meaning of a pen. But he's not talking about like, is the pen meaningful? He's saying like, what's the meaning of a pen? Oh, to write. But for us to write, not for, a fly to write. So he's talking about it like that. There's like a triadic level of meaning. That's the first level. It's like, what is the meaning of A or E in language, or plus sign in math, or a pen in, our toolbox. But then there's also proximate meaning, like which is, when you are impacted by another in any kind of way, where somebody, I don't know, they give you a nice tip, or they punch you in the face, whatever it is, like that right there would be a proximate meaning is manifested. But then there's ultimate meaning, and ultimate meaning is like which is what we crave, which is what is lacking in the world today. And that's why there's a meaning crisis, is we're lacking ultimate meaning, which is we want to feel like we matter to something bigger than us. We want to feel like we are leaving a legacy that is lasting after we have been here, and we want to feel like we matter to the greater universe as a whole, whether that's just human society in your mind or whether or not you think that is God. But we want to feel meaning, like we matter, like we are important. That's what it is. And that's ultimate meaning. And like I said, that already exists, but if you want to generate it more in a more obvious way in your life, it already exists for you. Then you have to form relationships that are permanent with people, like getting married. Like, you have to do that. You will, if you're just like dating or something, or you're just, I don't know, like hanging out with your coworkers who you won't speak to very much after, you get laid off or something, like, that's not gonna provide you with meaning. And even donating to charity is not going to provide you with ultimate meaning, because it's a fleeting moment. Anything that provides ultimate meaning, which is what the crisis of meaning is about, it comes from continuous, committed relationship that's permanent, and it has to be permanent. But when Vervaeke says this, he's like, meaning is the relationship between the objective and the subjective. Outside of the lowest level of meaning in the triality of meaning, in which we were just talking about the meaning of a pen or the meaning of a plus sign, it's not just it's subjective and objective are not just perspectives, they are perceivers. So we are the subjective, we are the subject to, the being above us in the hierarchy. Your cells are subject to you. We are subject to God. This is still in accordance with what Vervaeke is saying, but he would argue probably that, I don't know if he would argue, but he seems to think that we don't, I don't know, it's just the way he was talking about God as being like this past thing that we needed for meaning, and it was almost like he was describing it as being like made up for the sake of providing us with a sense of meaning. But I would argue that it is just the truth, and it does provide you with a sense of meaning, because that's a relationship that generates meaning. So here he's talking about spiritual but not religious. I thought this was great, because this is very common for everybody to say, but especially not so much like science people to say this, but people who are involved in theories of everything, and also like the woo, like new age,
that connectedness
space. This is very common, but it does not seem to fill. It's missing something that religion seems to provide, and they talk about it here. Like, what does it mean to be spiritual but not religious? Like, first of all, if spirit is a word that has any kind of value, then you are a spiritual being. You have a sentient soul, and so anybody that says that, to say I'm spiritual but not religious, I don't like the term. It just means like, it usually just means I believe in more than I can see, and that there's something special about sentience, versus if you're saying I'm not spiritual at all, and you're like, you just believe that we're just random chance chemical reaction, then maybe you're not spiritual. You're not as spiritual, but you are still spiritual. Like, there's no escaping being spiritual. You have a spirit, you're spiritual.
It's at the core of meaning in life. That's prototypically what we call wisdom. And here's how I can show you one clear instance of the meaning crisis. It's a wisdom famine. I do this regularly with my students. In the classroom, I'll say, where do you go for information? They hold up their phone. Where do you go for knowledge? They're a little bit slower, probably because they're in my class. They'll say, well, science, university. I'll say, where do you go for wisdom? There's silence. Wisdom isn't optional. That's why it is perennial, cross-cultural, cross-historical, because of the perennial problems. But we do not have homes for ecologies of practices that fit into our scientific technological worldview so that they are considered legitimate. The fastest growing demographic group are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They have no religious allegiance, but they are not primarily atheistic. They most frequently describe themselves with this has become almost everybody now describe, I'm spiritual but not religious, which means they are trying to find a way of reducing the bullshit and enhancing the connectedness, but they don't want to turn to any of the legacy established religions by and large.
Well, isn't both religion and the nuns, isn't wisdom a process, not a destination? So trying to find, if you're deeply faithful, religion.
Okay, so here's the thing. There is a reason why there is a wisdom like drought, essentially, and it is there's multiple reasons. One, like you said, you go to your phone for answers on everything. You don't have to look it up. You just rely on everybody else who came before you, who actually did the experimentation to figure out what was the answer to some things. Also, school destroys wisdom because it is an environment that is primarily you in a classroom sitting at a desk, not moving all day and memorizing stuff. Wisdom comes from experience. It's not a process like Lex says, in that it is separate from a destination. It is both a destination and a process. It's a destination that has to be experienced. I won't even say it's a process. It's a destination that has to be experienced. Wisdom isn't a continuous. I mean, it is in when you're talking about becoming wise in this and wise in that and wise in that and wise in that, but there is an objective level of wisdom that you can reach. That is ultimate wisdom. That doesn't mean you are ultimately all-knowing and wise in every situation. It just means you fundamentally understand the framing of the universe, which would be you're a sentient self-aware being with feelings inside a sentient self-aware being with feelings, and composed of sentient self-aware beings with feelings. That's ultimate wisdom. And all the implications that come along with that will change how you do everything. If you really internalize that idea, you will change your behavior. You will love your neighbor more. You will treat your body like a temple more. That doesn't mean you will be perfect. But it just means you will recognize the value, at least, in treating your body like a temple. You won't necessarily treat your body like a temple. You won't necessarily love your neighbor, but you will recognize the value in it. And so this, but what he's talking about here, where he's talking about spiritual but not religious, meaning it's people who are searching for connectedness and who are not getting wisdom because they're not experiencing life. Adolescence is being extended, and we're just sitting in a classroom not doing anything. You're not becoming wise. You're not experiencing life. You're not building things. You're not watching other people do things. You're just somebody is just writing things on a chalkboard and you're just copying down the notes. Of course, there's a wisdom drought. And also, the current narrative is that in our scientific academic world is that it is against the idea that sentience is fundamental, which is, aka, there's a God. If you take that to its logical extreme, and that if that is truly a requirement of ultimate wisdom, then you cannot get there without that assumption. Okay, and also, I will say this, yes, it appears that scripture and and religion is against the like science. It's not against science. It's just against science if you take everything literally and you don't look into translations and things like that. Like there's if you're just like, oh, the world wasn't created in 7 days, that's what I did. I was like, I know God doesn't exist because the world wasn't created in 7 days because I know fossils exist. That's what I told my rabbi when I was 13. And I didn't realize that like the word had been mistranslated for day. Yom means period. And it means a lot more than just like, it doesn't mean a 24-hour period like the way we think about it. And so like this, it's not necessarily against science, but the thing is then it's not the point. The point is that we have not had a theological tradition or a theological narrative, not a tradition, but a theological narrative that is built on and in alignment with our scientific observations. Specifically, until now, I would say, we're starting to have them. Conscious agent theory, sentient singularity theory, autodidactic universe, these are all starting to get there. I would say sentient singularity theory is there, but those others are also getting there, like, and have their own unique values. I'm not demeaning them. But like if something is self-teaching, meaning autodidactic, if the universe is autodidact, it's a sentient being. Like what else is an autodidact? But but what Vervaeke's saying is he's like, when people are seeking spirituality, then and they're not getting it from science, they're seeking also connection with something greater. They're not getting it from science. You do not feel connected to the universe. Literally, everybody that is like, I don't know, like a Bill Nye who's like, don't you know how insignificant you are? You're just a speck of dust that randomly like coalesced and had a chemical reaction, and you're just on a spinning rock in the corner of the galaxy, which is in the corner of the universe, and it's all just here by accident anyways. Like this, you could be aware of the entire universe. You could understand black holes well enough to, I don't know, maybe use them for something. You could know everything that we already know in the scientific world about stars. You won't feel connected. It won't give you a sense of meaning. The reason why is because connectedness is about being connected to sentient beings. It's about meaning, which is about impacting other sentient beings and being impacted by sentient beings. It's not, you're not going to feel meaning when you think that the universe is just an unconscious material dust bunny. Like otherwise you would feel meaning when you bought stuff. You bought that new purse, or you bought that new, like, I don't know, like knife or something, like for guys, like whatever it is, car, like it's nice. Like I like this pen. I bought this pen. It's cool. Like it doesn't make me feel meaning, but I like it. If the universe is unconscious, that's what I will experience when I think about it. I'll be like, yeah, stars are cool, the universe is cool, supernovas are cool, and I like it, but it's like, doesn't make me feel meaning, because it's just an unconscious dust ball. It has to be sentient, or else you will not be able to find any meaning in it. And I'm not even if you don't believe that it's sentient, I'm just telling you, there is no way for meaning to exist that is greater than our impact on other humans, unless the universe is a sentient being. That is it. So, even if you don't believe it is, but you want to be meaningful beyond humanity, like, maybe you should hope, at least, that it's a sentient being. Like, you don't feel meaningful to your car. Even after you take care of it, you're like, you don't feel like, oh yeah, you know, my car, I really did nice things for my car. Like, you feel good for you because your car is clean, but like, you don't feel like, oh, I really impacted my car, and it's going to remember that I did such nice things for it. It has no anything. It has no goals, no feelings, no awareness. And if the universe is like that too, what is there to connect to? That is why we're also having a drought of meaning. It's because we've been told by school that it's an unconscious dust ball, and school is keeping us out of the real world, which is decreasing our proximate wisdom, and it is teaching us that it's a dust bunny, which is destroying our ability to have ultimate wisdom. It's a mess, guys. It's a mess. Okay, this is another great. I know this is kind of long. I literally skipped parts of this entire stream about collective cognition and like all kinds of different topics because it was so long. His stream, it's not even just so long. There's longer streams that I've talked about. There's so many things that they hit on that I could go into because Vervaeke says a lot of really brilliant things.
No, because if you start doing that, you get an infinite regress. There has to be kinds of knowing that doesn't mean you know that you know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
Okay, great. Okay, good. Well, there was a lot of ink spilled over that over a 40-year period. So
By philosophers, they spill. This is what they do. They spill ink.
yeah, but
They
I want to
get
talk.
paid for ink spillage.
So I want to talk about what I call participatory knowing. This is the idea that you and the world, both me and a lot of this environment, are shaped by my biology. And so affordances for that are here. Look at this cup. Shared physics, shared sort of biological factors. Look at my hand, I'm bipedal.
Yep.
Also, culture is shaping me and shaping this. I had to learn how to use that and treat it as a cup.
Yep.
So this is an agent arena relationship, right? There's identities being created in your agency, identities being created in the world as an arena. So you and the world fit together. You know when that's missing, when you're really lonely or you're homesick or you're suffering culture shock. So this is participatory knowing. And
Okay, first of all, loneliness is not the same as culture shock. I do agree with him on culture shock. I don't agree with him on loneliness. And I have been culture shocked. Like, I went and lived in France with a family when I was living in high school, and like I lost it a little bit. Like at a certain moment, I ended up loving it. I had a great time, but like they just, when you're far away from home and everything is different and like you are restricted in weird ways that just because it's a different environment, like it's not that different, but it's different enough. And so culture shock and loneliness does occur when your world isn't familiar in how you interact with it so much anymore. But there is his idea when he says lonely for what? Like, why would a cup that you don't know how to drink from make you feel lonely? It shouldn't. There is this emotional desire always to be spiritual and not religious. If you're not a theist, and because there is a desire for the universe and existence to be sentient and to be a companion. But what he's saying here, though, I love the wording, even though I think he would probably disagree with me about the fundamental assumptions of what he's saying, or the nature of the environment that he's describing, not the assumptions of what he's saying. We would agree, but the nature of the environment that he's describing, I would say it is sentient, and he would say it's not. I'm not saying a cup is sentient. It's not. I'm saying the universe is sentient, and it does care about you, and God, existence is sentience, and he does care about you. That is a fact. Otherwise, why are you here? You weren't here, like, creation didn't happen by accident. Like, your sentience came from somewhere. And if you don't believe that, like, where do your ideas come from, as they talk about in here? It's like it comes from something. It comes from someone. But there is when he's talking about where there's like this, there is this relationship between us and our environment, and there is like participatory interaction between us and our environment. I agree with this, but I would take it even further and say the environment is sentient. But God manipulates things in multiple ways, but one of the ways is in timing. So like that doesn't mean like this is here because God. It means like even though the atoms are here because God. Or you could say, people would say, well, no, the atoms are here because stars. Well, gravity is here because God. And time is a way in which God maneuvers, because he is space. He doesn't maneuver in space, he maneuvers time. You don't even perceive it, but the timing of things. You go this way and he tries to maneuver time, the timing of things to coordinate. It is an interaction between you and the environment. And in my paper, there is an entire section of the paper that is called an interacting environment. And it's not an interactive environment. It says an interacting environment. It's an environment that interacts with you, not just an environment that you interact with. And but if you're going to think about like cups and things, then no, the cup isn't interacting with you. You're interacting with the cup. But if you're thinking about things on a fundamental level, and you're only looking at holonic periodicity, which is like hadrons, atoms, molecules, cells, organisms, families, and upwards, that is in that environment, those are all interacting with you, and that which they are composing of, or they are within, is also interacting with you. Time is interacting with you. It is a fluid, moving, animated thing. Time is, the universe is animated. It is moving. Like, look at every bit of evidence that we have. It is moving. Why? Like, why? Tell me something that isn't alive that does move on its own. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I mean, and I say that assuming that atoms and stuff are sentient, so. But, you know, like just looking at my water bottle, nobody touches it, it's not going to move. But it says it is a participatory environment. It is an interacting environment. And Vervaeke describes it like it's a being. And he calls it a being in this. But he says that we are a being and a cup is a being, and that means that he's not using the word the way that I do. Sentient singularity theory makes it very clear. There's beings and things. A cup is a thing. You and I are beings. Cells are beings. Anything that is part of the holonic periodicity of sentience is a being, and anything that's not is a thing. And so cup is a thing. We are not. We are things and beings, but we are fundamentally beings. We are emergently things, sure, but we are fundamentally beings. Whereas a cup is not. So, but it is weird. He talks about these things like they're alive, but then he says they're not. Why is his instinct to talk about them like they are? But he's right when he's talking also about how science doesn't fill wisdom. And like wisdom used to also be passed down from parent to child. It's not anymore because of the schools. Schools are destroying us. They're part of what is destroying us. Like, I absolutely know that. Don't just believe it. And it's not something that you can fix by changing the curriculum. It's a issue with the environment. The environment is wrong. It doesn't allow for wisdom. It doesn't allow. It's the outsourcing of parenting. It disconnects us from the passing on of wisdom through generations. It is disconnecting us from experience. There's so many problems with it. There's nothing you can do to change the curriculum to fix the schools. It's not just a matter of getting rid of, I don't know, like Columbus Day or critical race theory, like depending on what side you are on of politics. Like, which if you're on a side, like, that's wrong anyways. But it's impossible to not be like leaning. But it's not about the curriculum, it's the environment. Religion provided wisdom for two reasons. One, because it was accurate in its description of the universe or existence as a sentient being that has feelings and is self-aware, that purposely, intentionally created every single one of us, and therefore we are intrinsically meaningful and we are intrinsically connected to something larger. If your universe is an unconscious dust bunny, good luck connecting to it. And so this is why Stoicism and stuff like that, it's kind of like a gap filler, even like the way Buddhism is handled, at least in the West, by people in this like kind of watered down fashion, I imagine, is kind of Stoicism. It's like less masculine Stoicism, I guess, but it's not theistic, but it is like humanistic, and that will help, but it only takes you so far. It's like, why is a man supposed to be a certain way? Why are you supposed to, not harm the grasshopper? Like, eventually you're going to hit a wall. And that doesn't mean you'll realize that you hit the wall. It just means you will hit a wall. A meaning wall. So religion had it also in these texts. If you believe these scriptures are just nonsense, like, let me say this. These scriptures they are believed by the majority of the world. And that doesn't mean, like, the majority of the world, majorities are usually stupid. So in societal movements, majorities are not usually stupid when they are intergenerational societal movements. Stupid ideas do not transcend multiple generations and in a useful manner. Okay? They are usually counterproductive to being reproductive. Scripture is not that. There's something wiser than us in these scriptural texts, regardless of where you think they came from. And anybody that doesn't admit that is not thinking critically enough. You might not think they came from God. You might not believe in all the morals of it or whatever. Like, it might offend you. It doesn't matter. Point is that the wisdom contained within them somehow animates humanity towards intergenerational productivity and order, for the most part. And that implies that there is wisdom in it beyond any living human being. And there is no text that is the equivalent in science. Science is not a competitor to religion. Anybody that frames it like that is wrong. I don't like the word religion, and neither do like Orthodox, like people who are in Orthodox communities. Orthodox Muslims would not say that Islam is their religion unless they're talking to people who are not like Orthodox Muslim. It's the same thing with Orthodox Jews and Orthodox Christians. They don't say I'm religious. They say, like, I am observant. Like, that's different. Religion is a nonsense word. It's almost like, it's like a word created by anti-theists to explain something they don't understand. It's like illusion or I don't know, like meaning of life. Like, it just doesn't exist. It's just a different it's just it's a it is a community and set of practices and communal standards that are organized around a text that is wise. That's at a minimum. I mean, I think it's divinely inspired, but you don't have to. Don't take my word for it either. Like, if you don't see that, then don't believe me. Okay. So Vervaeke describes some, and I realize this is a long one, but that's fine. We're almost done. Vervaeke describes himself as a non-theist. And I talk a lot on here about theism, and I would describe myself as a theist. People ask me, are you Jewish? Are you Christian? Are you Muslim? I could explain that, all of that, but it just would take too long for most of the time. Or they'll be like, are you materialist? Are you an idealist? Are you a panpsychist? I'm a theist, fundamentally. And I think that is the best way of describing my worldview. And I say that there's no atheists because you either believe the universe is sentient or you don't, and you might lean strongly or not, or be more on the fence, but you still lean one way or another because you interact with the universe every day. You have to have an opinion about it. It's not Bigfoot, who you just is out of sight, out of mind. The universe is always on your mind, whether you are intentionally thinking about it or not. Do you think about the universe as a sentient being as you go about your day? If you do, you're a theist. If you think, when you sit there and you're like, is it really like aware and feeling? Am I inside a being? And you're like, yeah, I think so. Then you're a theist. You're just not as devout, or you're not as confident a theist. But if you don't believe that it is a sentient being, then you are an anti-theist, not an atheist. An anti-theist. And there is no agnosticism about God either. There is no atheism, there is no agnosticism. You can be agnostic about Bigfoot or QAnon, that's fine. But atheism is a word that should have never been created. It has no meaning. That's why people who call themselves atheists, and I speak as somebody who used to, would say, I have no belief on God. It's not that I disbelieve, I have no belief. I believe in something greater, but I have no belief in God. Maybe it's there. But then you'll press them and they'll be like, there's no God, you idiot. It's like, you're an anti-theist. Sam Harris is an anti-theist. I've said there's only theism and non-theism, but Vervaeke says there's only theists and anti-theists is what I say. Vervaeke calls himself a non-theist. I've never heard anybody say this. I think it's a stupid word, to be honest, but we're going to let him just explain it.
Closer to truth than maybe is an atheist closer to truth than a person who believes in God?
So I'm a non-theist, which means I think the shared set of presuppositions between the theist and the atheist are actually what needs to be rejected.
Can you explain that further?
Yes, I can. And I want to point out, by the way, that there are lots of non-theistic religious traditions. So I'm not coming up with a sort of airy-fairy category.
Yeah, and what's the difference in non-theism, agnosticism, and atheism?
So non-theists think that the theist and the atheist share a bunch of presuppositions. For example, it's that sacredness is to be understood in terms of a personal being that is in some sense the supreme being, and that the right relationship to that being is to have a correct set of beliefs. I reject all of those claims.
So both the theist and the atheist
in their modern version. Yes.
By the way, just so you know, it's not the modern version that believes that. It's the ignorant version that believes that. I do not believe that. I'm a theist. I do not believe that at all. Sacredness is about that which is the highest truth, or connected to the highest truth, which is a sentient being. That's what I believe. I don't believe that you have to believe in anything. And neither do any Orthodox observant people that I know that are truly good, you know. The ones I associate with, at least, like, those people dress biblically, okay? They tell. I remember once I was speaking to a rabbi, okay, and I told him that I just had this, like, I just had a feeling that one day I was going to wear a yarmulke full time, and I didn't really know why. Still don't know exactly how I feel about it. I'm wearing one now because it's like, it's the holy times, and I'm trying it out. It's like the high holy days in Judaism, but I don't normally wear one when I'm outside of like synagogue or something. But I I said to him that I felt like I would wear one day, and he said to me, "Do not do it if you do not understand it. Don't do anything you do not understand. Like, don't." He was like, "If you don't understand why you shouldn't do this, don't do it." Or even if that understanding is a feeling that is like, there's, it's an intuition, that's okay. But like, you should seek a deeper understanding, but don't just take someone else's word for it, or even the word of a book, until you know until you have experienced that book enough to know that book has wisdom beyond your understanding. If you're at that level, then maybe you start trusting that book. But if you're not at that level, then why trust the book? I'm a theist. I do not believe that holiness is just like doing things that are expected because of some tradition. Like that, what he's saying there isn't a modern theological belief. It is a secular perspective that's false of what it means to be a theist. And that's just the truth. It's funny because he talks about Jonathan Pageau. I think that's how you say his name. If I botched his name, I apologize. Who is brilliant. It seems a brilliant theist, Christian. I am also Christian. And like, so there's definitely shared understanding there of like theological depth, and and even like perspective, I'll say. And he says that Jonathan Pageau, or if that's how you say his name, is more like a 15th century, Christian in his beliefs, and that he's not like a modern theist, as he calls it, because he believes what I just said, which is that which is holy is that which is connected to the most truth, which is exactly what Vervaeke says. But I would say that it's only sacred if it's also built within the constructs and not confines, but gosh, like, free degrees of freedom and constraints. That's what I'm trying to say. Constraints of like a system that is sentient. Yoshabak says this. He's like, a simulation can only be sentient or something like that. I don't like the word simulation, like I said, but he's not wrong. Like, he's right. It is sentient. But Vervaeke is right about what is supposed to be sacred. He's wrong about what it means to be a theist. And if he respects Jonathan Pageau as like a serious theist, then he should probably assume that Jonathan's definition of a theist is the accurate one. Not just like people who went to church once a year, who are really secular hedonists who go to college. Like, that's not, they don't define what theism is. They don't. I don't know what a non-theist is still, though.
Do you reject it in the sense that you don't know, or do you reject it in the sense that you believe that each one of those presuppositions is likely to be not true?
The latter. Both on reflection, argument, and personal experimentation and experience, I've come to the conclusion that those shared propositions are probably not true.
Which one is the most troublesome to you? The personal being, the kind of accumulation of everything into a one being that ultimately created stuff.
So for me, there's two, and they're interlocked together. I'm not trying to dodge your question.
Yeah.
It's that the idea that the ground of being is some kind of being, I think, is a fundamental mistake.
It's void of being.
No. Like,
The ground of being is some kind of being.
no.
The turtles all the way down.
The ground of being is not itself any kind of being. Being is not a being. It is the ability for things to be, which is not the same thing as a being.
Are humans beings?
We are beings. This glass is a being. This table is a being. But when I ask you, how are they all in being? You don't say by being a glass, or by being a table, or by being a human. You want to say, no, there's something underneath it all, and then you realize it can't be anything. This is why many mystical traditions converge on the idea that the ground of being is no thingness, which is, which you normally pronounce as nothingness. But if you put the hyphen back in, you get the original intent, no thingness. And that is bound up with, okay, what I need to do in order to be in relationship with, so it's a misconstruing of ultimate reality as a supreme being, which is a category mistake to my mind, and then my relationship to it, that sacredness is a function of belief. And I have been presenting you an argument through most of our discussion that meaning is at a deeper level than beliefs and propositions. And so that is a misunderstanding of sacredness, because I take sacredness to be that which is most meaningful and connected to what is most real.
I agree with his definition on what is sacred. As a theist, that is my definition of sacred. Also, I will say this: he's got so much right here, but he's also got some serious things I think that are wrong, and they're very serious. They dictate whether or not you can make sense of things at this ultimate level. And he's still doing better than I could have ever imagined. But the thing is, though, is that if the cup is a being and I am a being, then being means nothing. Okay? It's just like whether or not you perceive something as something. But a being, in sentient singularity theory, like I said, it's very specific. It differentiates the world into two levels of existence: beings and things. Beings are fundamental, they are sentient, they are self-aware, they are self-defining, and they are foundational reality as well. Then there's things that are emergent from the perspectives of entanglement relationships of beings, sentient beings, on all levels of the periodicity of sentience, from hadrons up. So, to God. He says then it's a category error to call God a being, because he is defining a being as a cup and us, and a human. If a being the label of being can be applied to human and cup, then it cannot be applied to the universe or existence. But I disagree with that. It can't. Everything can be a being, but that makes the word being useless. You have to have a differentiation between beings and things, and he uses these words interchangeably. He says this is why ancient non-theological religious traditions essentially talk about, or metaphysical traditions talk about, like, fundamental existence as no thingness. And a lot of people get on my case about this all the time. They're always like sending me messages. It's multiple people, and like, nothing against them. I agree with them when they say to me, like, it's no thing, it's nothing, it's no thingness. Like, fundamental existence is no thing. I basically agree with that, in that it's a being, it's not a thing. And if there's only one being, then there are no things, because things are emergent from the interaction interactive perspectives of multiple sentient beings interacting. Like, you don't have cups without us. Like, God cannot make a cup without anyone, including, if there were no atoms and no hadrons, God cannot make a cup. And if it wasn't for us to also dictate what the definition of a cup is and the usefulness of a cup, then there would be no cup. Like, God can't, like, prior to creation, and all there is just a singular sentient self-aware being with feelings, but there's no one else. There's also nothing else. And people get hung up on that no-thingness. It's nothing. It's like, sure, that's great. Don't tell me what it isn't, tell me what it is. It's a being. But a being is different than a thing. The glass that he held up, and he's like, this is a being. It's not a being. And if it is a being, then we need to just erase the word from our vocabulary because it is now useless. It applies to everything, which means it applies to nothing. Words are there for the sake of context, and context comes from differentiation. If there's any word that can literally be applied to fundamentally defining everything that we perceive and everything that fundamentally exists, not just everything that fundamentally exists or just everything we perceive, then it is a word that should not exist. Beings and things are different. They have to be, logically. If they're not, then we need to get rid of the word. So once again, I don't know what his beliefs are. I'm confused. Does he believe that it's a singular sentient being that loves us, or that at least like has feelings? It doesn't have to love us, but like I think that it's self-evident that it does. Otherwise, why are we here? But then it has feelings because that is what like a coherent information, self-referencing information system is. Like, that's what it has to be. Like, there's no other way for existence as a singular existence to be other than it to be self-referencing information, which makes it self-aware. Like, it doesn't... I don't understand. Like, he seems to say that it's not conscious. And if I'm wrong on that, then I want to know. I'm going to watch his stream again, but that would be an enormous difference between us. But I'm, like I said, I'm surprised he got where he did. But he, this is what's wrong with like our current place in metaphysics, where we're trying to make sense of what is consciousness, what is not conscious, what is being, what is a thing. And we have confused it all, so you just have like idealism and materialism and panpsychism, and like they're all true, but they are about context, because that is what is defining of everything, is context. That means that you have to have a word to differentiate that which is an emergent, entanglement, illusion, but it's not an illusion, versus what is fundamentally ground level existence, which is a being, not a thing.
And theists think of what? Of sacredness as what?
They think of sacredness as a property of a particular being, God, and that the way that is meaningful to them is by asserting a set of propositions or beliefs. Now, I want to point out that this is what I would now call modern or common theism. You go back into the classical periods of Christianity, you get a view that's really radically different from how most people understand theism today.
Okay, so let me...
You get a view that is very different from what most secularists, who also claim to be religious, like my family, if you asked us, like my entire family is secular. I am the only theist. And even then, I still live in a fairly secular world. I communicate with people constantly who are not in a secular world. They're in a very orthodox observant world. but they are like, but I still live in a fairly secular world, even though I'm not I try not to live a secular life. And if that means anything, it just means like not like more like, I guess if it means like hedonistic, if it means anything, to be honest. And people don't like to be called hedonists, but like hedonism doesn't mean you do horrible things. It means you do what you feel is best, and what makes you feel good, and like that's what most people do. That doesn't mean that they only do bad things, because most of the time, like, doing bad things doesn't make you feel good. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it does not. Sometimes doing good things makes you feel good. That's still hedonism. Like, a non-secular worldview would be like one in which there are intrinsic moral responsibilities that come from God. That's a non-secular worldview.
Interesting question that I usually think about in the form of mathematics, but so in that case, if meaning is sacred in your non-theist view, is meaning created or is it discovered?
There's a Latin word that doesn't separate them, called inventio. As a property of a particular being, God.
What he is saying makes no sense, and I get that a lot of people would agree with him that this is the definition. I'm just saying those people do not understand what true theism is.
And that the way that is meaningful to them is by asserting a set of propositions or beliefs. Now, I want to point out that this is what I would now call modern or common theism. You go back into the classical periods of Christianity, you get a view that's really radically different from how most people understand theism today.
Okay, so let me, this is an interesting question that I usually think about in the form of mathematics, but so in that case, if meaning is sacred in your non-theist view, is meaning created or is it discovered?
There's a Latin word that doesn't separate them, called inventio. And I would say that, and before you say, oh, well, give me a chance, because you participate in it. You've experienced an insight, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Did you make it happen?
The insight.
Did you make it happen, or did you do? Like, can you do that? I need an insight. This is what I do to make an insight.
Oh, I see. Yeah, in some sense, it came from elsewhere.
Right, but you didn't just passively receive it either. You're engaged and involved in it. That's why you get, right? So that's what I mean by you participate in it. You participate in meaning.
So you do think that it's both?
Yes.
You do think it's both? I mean, that's not a trivial thing to understand.
See, all of what he's saying is correct, and this is why I'm so confused, and I don't know what his worldview is, and I'm going to have to watch it all again, but we're almost done. We're going to like 2 more clips, maybe even 1. 2. So, I agree with him about meaning. It is not created or discovered. It is, I mean, it can be discovered, and it can also be created, and that's why there's a word for it that's both. It's contextual, but it also is both at the same time, but it can be more one or the other. It's kind of complicated, but it's both. I use the word generative, or the universe is generative of sentience and generative of meaning, because meaning comes from sentience, sentient interactions. So if it's generative of sentient beings, it's generative of meaning as well. So that's the English word that we could use to mean both invented and created and discovered. It is this is why I say you are a co-creator of the universe with God. You are. Like, my wife and I, if anybody has been following this content, knows, like, we've tried to start a family. We unfortunately experienced, like, miscarriage last year. But when you go through that, you realize, like, even not just a miscarriage, but having children or trying, it doesn't matter. You realize like you are co-creator, okay, like of reality. Like you're not the creator of reality, or not, nobody creates reality. You're not the creator of the universe, but you are co-creator of the universe. You're not the main author. You're like a character that's sentient and can make choices, but you're not writing the book either. Like eventually, like the book that will be written, but that doesn't mean you can't make choices in it. So I don't know if he's a theist. I'm actually going to ask him on Twitter, and hopefully one day he watches this. It's kind of long, but I want to know, like, does he believe that the universe is a sentient being that's self-aware? If he believes that, he's a theist. And here's why I know that's true. Even if, and if he doesn't believe that, then he's an anti-theist. He's not a non-theist. To be a non-anything is to not be. Okay, so you cannot have a worldview that is based on a non-view. Okay, like you cannot define yourself by a negative. If you do, you will become that which you are trying to avoid, which is funny because he's basically becoming a theist, it seems, but and just the way he describes things. But you can't be a non-theist and have that be a worldview. It's impossible. You can't be an anti-theist because an anti-theist is not really. It's different than a non-theist. Non-theist is a lack of worldview, and an anti-theist is not a lack of worldview. It is against a specific thing, and even then, you will end up becoming the dogma that you despise if you define yourself by a negative. You should define yourself by what you believe, not by what you don't believe, because you can't build from what you don't believe. If I say to you, like once I was in this discussion with this guy, and he was just like, I don't know, he was saying things that were just wrong. And he was basically, I'm not going to get into it too much, but I was asking him, I was like, he wasn't the biggest fan of Jewish people. Let's just say that. And I was like, okay, do you believe in God? And he was like, I don't believe in your God. And I was like, okay, that's, but do you believe in God? He was like, I don't believe in any Jewish God. And I was like, okay, but what do you believe? And like, there's no building, okay, that can happen from an absent belief. Even like in the Jewish culture, I will say, coming from a secular Jewish culture, not a theistical Jewish culture, observant Jewish culture, but a secular Jewish culture, people will say you don't Jews believe in one God, but you don't even have to believe in God. You can be an atheist and still be a Jew, but the only thing is like, you can't believe in Jesus. All of that's wrong, by the way. Like, I mean, there's so much more to that, but just like that is the common, even Jewish understanding of what it means to be Jewish, which is wrong, by the way. Like, there's so much about being Jewish that is not that, and they just don't know, and I didn't know, because like, you stop learning about it at like 10 years old, like of course you're going to have a 10-year-old opinion of it. Same thing with God. If you stop learning about theism at 13, you're going to become somebody who calls themselves a non-theist, like Vervaeke, and you're going to misdefine theism. You can't build a worldview of like, we don't believe in this. We don't believe in God. We don't believe in Jesus. We don't believe in matter. We don't believe in space-time. Oh, I don't believe in... I'm a non-theist. There's no building. You need... Any foundational worldview must start from something that exists to build on. A non-existence is not something that you can build on. It's like, what is the implications of non-theism? I don't know. What is the implications of which, like, if you break the word down, not what he defines it as, but like break the word down. like not no God, like no Godism. That's what that means. Okay, then what do you believe in? There's nothing foundational to start building from. And like you could build from materialism. That doesn't mean you'll build as high as you can build from theism, but like you can build from materialism. You can say I'm a materialist. I respect that way more than saying I'm an atheist, which I know that people who say they're materialists usually also say they're atheists, but like one of them is a worldview that you can build on, one of them is not. You cannot build from non-theism or non-this or no, not that. It's like, just imagine asking somebody for information about something. It's like, what is, if you were trying to describe your world to an alien and they were like, what is your world like? And you were like, it's, I don't know. You were like, it's not, it's like hard to even think of something. It's like, I don't know. If you were just describing your country of Brazil, I don't know, like or like some island that you're from that's tropical, and you're like, somebody's like, well, what's your island like? Your tropical island, and you don't know what tropical means, but what's your island like? And you're like, it's not cold. Okay, so it's not cold. That's all I know. But if you're like, you say something like it's warm, that's different than even saying it's not cold. Or you say it's wet. It's like, okay, it's wet. It probably also has plants then. It's like, it's warm. It probably doesn't have snow, and it probably has, it's either a desert or it's tropical. It's like you can build, but if you're just like, it's not cold, or some other not, it's like there's nothing to build from. I realize I'm kind of rehashing it, but you cannot overstate the importance of building. Don't have an anti-ideology. That's my point. Anti-ideology is if you have a moral anti-ideology, you will become exactly what you despise. I'm telling you right now, because you're still defining yourself by that thing that you despise. If you're like an anti-fascist, you'll become a fascist. If you are an anti-theist, you will become everything that you think a theist is. Not everything that is a theist, but everything that you think a theist is. If you're non-theist, you'll become everything that you think a theist is. Eventually. Possibly. But at least most people. If you're an anti-racist, you will become a racist. Like if you look at the difference between like somebody who's a libertarian versus an anti-fascist, on paper, those two things mean the same thing. They do not in how they manifest in our human, like, acting out of what that worldview. One of them is still defined by fascism, and the other one is defined by liberty. They do not. And I'm not making a moral claim on any of them, but I'm just saying, like, why do they act so different if they're for the same thing on paper? Because one of them is defined by fascism, and the other one, and not just fascism, what you think fascism is. If you're an anti-fascist, you think fascism is absolutely tyrannical. So you can only be defined by that which is absolutely tyrannical. Don't have an anti-ideology, especially in morality. But even if it's a fundamental worldview, it will still lead to incoherence and hypocrisy. Okay, last clips, and then we're getting out of here. I know this was so long, and I'm sorry, but Vervaeke says brilliant things, and we had to talk about it. I skipped over more than half of his stream. Just clips.
Is evil?
Okay, hold on.
Is this a word you avoid?
No, I don't.
What is evil? Is this a word you avoid?
No, I don't. Because I think part of what we're wrestling with here is resisting the Enlightenment, I mean the historical period in Europe, the idea that evil and sin can just be reduced to immorality, individual human immorality. I think there's something deeper in the idea of sin than just immoral. I think sin is a much more comprehensive category. I think sin is a failure to love wisely so that you ultimately engage in a kind of idolatry. You take something as ultimate, which is not. And that can tend to constellate these collective agents, I call them hyper agents, within distributed cognition that have a capacity to wreak havoc on the world that is not just due to a sort of a sum total of immoral decisions. This goes to Hannah Arendt's thing, right? And the banality of Eichmann. She was really wrestling with it, and I think she's close to something, but I think she's slightly off. Eichmann is just making a whole bunch of immoral decisions, but it doesn't seem to capture the gravity of what the Nazis did, the genocide and the warfare. And she's right, because you're not going to get just the summation of a lot of individual, rather banal, immoral choices adding up to what was going on. You're getting a comprehensive parasitic process within massive distributed cognition that has the power to confront the world and confront aspects of the world that individuals can't. And I think when we're talking about evil, that's what we're trying to point to. This is a point of convergence between me and Jonathan Pajot. We've been talking about this.
So the word sin is interesting.
Yes.
Are you comfortable using the word sin? Because it's so deeply rooted in religious texts.
It is. And in part, and I struggle around this because I was brought up as a fundamentalist Christian. And so that is still there within me. There's trauma associated with that.
Probably layers of self-deception mechanisms.
No doubt.
That you're slowly escaping.
I am just going to leave my comments on at that is brilliant. What everything you just said about sin is brilliant. It was brilliant. It was. I think is he sure he's not a theist? Because if he's agreeing with Jonathan Pajot and me, that was brilliant. That was one of the most brilliant descriptions of evil and sin I've ever heard in my life. It probably is the most brilliant description of evil and sin I've ever heard. It's brilliant. Last clip is his advice for young people, and then I'm going to give my advice for young people regarding this meaning crisis, because I don't think that his actually helps. But
and that part of the task of our humanity is to get those different centers into some internal culture by which they are optimally cooperating rather than in conflict with each other.
What advice would you give to young people? Today, they're in high school, trying to figure out what they're going to do with their life. Maybe they're in college. What advice would you give? How to have a career they can be proud of, or how to have a life they can be proud of?
So the first thing is find an ecology of practices and a community that supports them without involving you in believing things that contravene our best understood science, so that wisdom and virtue, and especially how they show up in relationships, are primary to you. This will sound ridiculous, but if you take care of that, the other things you want are more likely to occur, because what you most want is what you want when you're approaching your death is what were the relationships you cultivated to yourself, to other people, to the world, and what did you do to improve the chance of them being deep and profound relationships?
Well, that's an interesting.
I totally agree with everything you just said. I just don't think that it's easy to just do that without any sense of direction. And but I do agree with what he said. I mean, everything that he said, I agree with. And especially, he said on your deathbed, your relationships with other people, your impact on other people, your impact on sentient beings around us are that are permanent are going to matter, that are lasting. Given that, my simple bit of advice to young people, and I say this as somebody who did it the hard way, but not like the hardest way I could have, but still like harder than it should have been, is to get married. I have my wedding posted on here. Like I said, if you think that your life is meaningless, go and commit your being to someone who you are physically attracted to, who you're good at solving problems with, who you have aligned goals with, and there's one more thing that's important. What is it? And who you can be yourself around. And if those 4 things are met, get married. Do not hesitate and wait, because there could be somebody better. There always could be somebody better. There always will be somebody younger, better looking, richer, smarter, always. That's not the point. And it is permanent, committed relationships that give our life meaning. And we used to enter into them much earlier. And especially if you do not have a theological worldview, it's especially hard to feel meaning outside, because what other permanent relationships are there besides marriage and your family, which even that, like, you're not supposed to just be taking care of, your family all the time. In some ways, yeah, you're supposed to take care of your parents when they get old, but like that's not till they get old. And even then, that's not your entire life. So, ideally, meaning comes from permanent, committed, good relationships with other sentient beings. Marriage is that relationship. Date intentionally. And when I say intentionally, I mean with marriage as the goal. And dating outside of that is only going to hurt everyone. It hurts the world. Like what he was talking about, sin. I'm guilty of that, by the way. So I was a secularist. I had a different worldview, but still, I was wrong. I can't, you cause chaos. Cause order, find meaning, and that starts with marriage if you're attracted to the opposite sex, at least. And that is the simplest way. It is also a responsibility, and I'm mainly speaking to men, because most women want to get married as soon as they find a guy that they like. Men, their nature is to not get married if they're having sex before marriage. You used to not, and if you're in Orthodox observant communities, you still don't. That's why they get married at 18 and 20, because they're trying to get it. But if you're in secular world where you are getting sex before marriage, I'm telling you, just men, your nature is going to trick you into being like, I'm fine. I don't need to get married. Why do I get married? There's other people around to look at. If you go down that road, you will continue to feel meaninglessness. That's my advice, is to get married. But I do agree with Vervaeke. He's right. It's just good luck just building that, what he just said, without religion, which I don't think you have to do it without religion, but it's hard if you don't see past the assumptions and the dogma that is projected onto religion by people who are actually primarily secular. The most devout and observant people that I know, scripturally devout and scripturally observant people that I know, do not take their perspective on scripture is not the same as what is assumed it to be by secularists. They don't take it as literally. They take it super literally and metaphorically mainly, but they're not opposed to science. So anyways, with that, I will answer any final questions. Thank you so much, Torin, for the $5. at I'm really glad to see the super chat is working. Hopefully, when we get into more complex moral issues, we do not get banned. I agree, you do need sentience in order to have intelligence, and that you need a telos in order to have sentience. So why do you think AGI will become sentient? Where does the telos emerge? Where does your telos emerge? That's where it emerges from. Where it emerges from the place that all sentience emerges from. The word in Proverbs 1:7, for fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, is yirah, which word spans between our English concepts of fear and awe. Exactly. That's exactly what I said. I said it was somewhere between fear and awareness, but like awareness of God is awe. Like I know that because of my own experiences. I knew that, and I didn't even know the word because it's just obvious when you understand this stuff. Thank you, Arbalest Tribe, for writing that in there. That's awesome. I'm going to actually screenshot that. Hello, Marco. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Please hit the like button. It really helps boost the algorithm. I hope this was valuable. I know it was long. I am going to try and start these earlier, but, you know, my life is a bit chaotic. So we're still doing them every single Tuesday. I haven't missed any Tuesdays. Very consistent. Usually has been starting at 8, but I'm going to try and start it at 7, between 7 and 7:30. Eventually might be like a process to get it there. I will be adding timestamps to this probably tomorrow. And if you would like to join our Discord call this week, it will be on Thursday, 7 p.m. Pacific time. Send me a message on Instagram, a private message, and ask me for the link, and I will send you the link to our Discord call. It's always a great time. If you would like to read more about sentient singularity theory, the link is below. sentientsingularity.com is the website. And if you'd like to contribute financially, other than super chats, there is also a what is it called? Patreon. Link below. We are upgrading in the next couple months our equipment to a computer capable of editing, and so we can do more than just lives. We'll do some interviews and things like that. And I think that's it. Peace. Thank you.